Hello. Is it Triple T you're looking for? If so, then welcome to episode 6 of the Triple Takeover Toycast, the show that dives into the world of the Transformers as well as other toy lines of the past. Your host, as always, are a writer, photographer, and a man who knows more about catalogues than Argos. It's M.A.S.K, also known as TFsquareone. Say hi, M.A.S.K.
Hi, M.A.S.K.
We also have YouTuber, writer, photographer, and someone with their fingers in more social media pies than Mr. Kipling. It's Sixo.
Hello. I wondered where that was going to go for a minute there.
Does it make you want a Mr. Kipling pie?
Yes, amongst other things.
And I'm Toybox Soapbox, or as my window cleaner calls me, Liam. Now, originally, this episode was going to feature a very...
Oh my God.
Now, originally, this episode was going to feature a very different topic, but we decided to hit the brakes, change gears, take the junction back to 2003 for a look at one of the most underrated toy lines in all of Transformers. So put your seatbelt on, as episode 6 is all about alternators and Binaltech. Lads, can you believe we're actually up to episode 6 already?
It's a bit mad, isn't it?
How have
Brilliant.
we gone? How have we gone from no episodes to 6 episodes in such a short amount of time?
I think what we've done is we've sat around and waffled on a bit, basically. That's been the formula so far, but
It's
seems
like
to be
every day,
working
isn't
right.
it?
Yeah, exactly.
We've just basically taken what we do online every day of the week and started recording it.
That's the goal that we have, though. That's what the joy of this is. So,
Minus the pub. Yeah.
Are you both enjoying it as much as I am?
I am, certainly. Yeah, really enjoying it. And I know we've said it before, but it's really great to see some of the reaction to it and that as well. And I really love kind of reading all the comments and people saying that, you know, it feels very natural and not stuck up and all of that kind of stuff, which I guess is the kind of vibe that we were really going for. So it's great to see.
Yeah, I look forward to these sessions hugely because on top of being a discussion about toys, something we talk about all the time, it's my opportunity to catch up with friends. You know, everyone has maybe Zoom calls with their folks, with family, regular basis. This is as close as an opportunity I have to meet up with friends, not being in the UK anymore myself. So it's a huge highlight of any week that we do this.
Yeah, definitely. I guess it's worth acknowledging that that's kind of how it all started, really, wasn't it? It's not like we didn't talk about this stuff beforehand, as you said, Maz. It's just, I guess that's why it's quite natural, really, because we would have probably been doing this anyway. We just happened to be recording it.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just, for me, it's just a really nice part of each week, or every other week, depending on when we record, just to have, just to chat to you guys, see how you're doing, see all of the Transformers behind Sixo.
Yeah, they all are.
All of Transformers.
They've been rearranged a little bit, actually. I'm trying to, make a bit of room here and there where I can.
I hear you're making room for a bit of a mystery guest.
Maybe, new arrival. We'll have to see.
I mean, come on, by the time this airs,
I was going to say,
the photos will be out there.
Well, they might be. So, but yeah, I just want to make sure it all goes well. It's a bit of a risky one. So
the bit I love is that the one that Liam's talking about isn't even the most recent one. I know about the one after it.
Oh yeah.
So you talked yourself, was it through editing the podcast, you talked yourself into buying one of your grails?
Quite probably, yeah. Just hearing myself chatter is like editing it, and that's it's palpable. It is funny actually, these podcasts, just listening to them, that you do kind of, as you're talking about various things, you do kind of think, oh yeah, no, that would be interesting, to check that out, tick that off the list finally, stuff like that. So yeah, but I'll let you know when it arrives.
The Transformers will return after these messages.
All right, well, before we talk about the toys, what were we all doing in 2003? Because it's a very different time, isn't it, in the Transformers landscape? It's not like it is now.
Oh man, that's a scary question, actually, because we were just kind of chatting pre the podcast actually about time in the last 20 years, weren't we? And it's a funny old one, because I don't know, when I hear 2003, it kind of sounds like yesterday in a funny way, and it's only when I sit down and think that actually that's 18 years ago. That is quite terrifying, especially just kind of considering, I suppose, that there will be, a lot of fans, collectors, whatever, that possibly weren't even born then, or kind of were just being born. So
oh yeah, that is mad. Like
really
18 years, for half of that time I've had a child. I mean, that's even more crazy for me.
But you know what is quite surreal when you think about it is that from 1984 to 2003, it's 19.
Oh, here we go.
We're sort of from from the
this
start.
old chestnut.
This is it.
Here we go.
It's 19 years from the start,
Ugh.
from G1 to when alternators launched in 2003, and now from then to 2021, it's 18 years. We're in that sort of same space. It's crazy, isn't it? But do you want to know some sort of?
So they're vintage now.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Though you don't think of them as vintage, do you? They don't spring to mind as that, but. We would have thought of G1 as vintage at that time.
They actually, one thing about alternators and Binaltech for me is that it feels like the beginning of modern Transformers. In my mind, anyway, that's where like modern Transformers begins, because it's the first sort of new iteration of Optimus and all those guys. You know, all the cars and the classic G1 Autobots. It's the first time that they were all really brought back. You know, in kind of modern form or whatever. So that's how I always think of it, is modern Transformers. But yeah, if it's 18 years old, it's not really, is it?
No, and it's very of that time. Like I remember I would have been like 21, and I was just going out into pubs. But it's the first time I really had disposable cash. Is when I was, in the first job, and so to me, that was kind of like the gateway in. Even though I'd been picking up Transformers here and there, I wasn't really big into the fandom, and the reissues at that point of G1 toys were still only like 2 or 3 years, weren't they? Was it 2001, 2002?
Yeah, it would have been G1 commemorative reissues in the UK. It would have been Armada. Isn't that right? It would have been Armada.
Armada would have been Armada was 2002, I think. 2002.
Armada was 2002, so it would have been Energon.
Yeah. So but I think at the time it's still when Smokescreen is released, we're still in the dying days of Armada. We're just at the end there, but we'd had robots in disguise, hadn't we? And it's kind of hard to remember how it was then. Like G1 wasn't what it is now, is it? It was just kind of like it was a past brand, wasn't it?
It was
we'd
past,
moved on
very much. It had a nod in the Beast Wars cartoon, but even that was kind of like, whoa, do you know what I mean? And it was like, oh, we'll never see that again, really. And then you got the double whammy, didn't you, of like MP1 and BT Smokescreen, and it was kind of like, I don't know, it just felt like, oh, here's your childhood again, in this kind of incredible new form. It was really something.
Oh yeah, I just remember so many conversations with fans who were disappointed because it didn't really measure up to Generation 1 in terms of certain types of accuracy and character choices. And I think it was a mistake that a lot of fans made at the time, which they were believing that they were getting G1 reborn. And I think it affected a lot of people's opinion of some of the toys we got in Alternators and Binaltech, because they were expecting slavish G1 reimaginings, whereas this kind of was a slightly different thing.
Well, it was kind of, I think it was initially conceived anyway by Hasbro and Takara as that, wasn't it? They had that in mind to do the G1 car cast and what have you, but licenses being what they were and all of that kind of gubbins, which I'm sure we'll get into, plans went awry and it kind of ended up as its own thing. And actually a lot of the characters were, yes, mostly G1, but still kind of unique in their way, and, some new characters and whatever thrown in. But I think, I don't know, for me, I remember, I collected a lot of those toys at the time, and that was my gateway back into collecting. I'd given up
Same
at that
here,
point,
yeah.
very much. So it was Swindle was the first one for me that I saw when I was in New York, funnily enough, in a Toys R Us. For larks, literally just for a laugh.
Was it the massive one in Times Square?
It was, and it had a little like a Ferris wheel thing in there.
Incredible store.
Really, really something. And I remember like we were just like literally looking at whatever. I was with two mates, and we were on like a bit of a lads holiday in New York, as you do. It was a hilarious time actually. Only there like 5 days. And just trying to like navigate like what's jaywalking, like why is a police officer shouting at me and things like that, all of that kind of gubbins. And just ended up in Toys R Us and rounded the corner and saw all of these Transformers just there, and was just absolutely blown away. I think actually I got Swindle, and then I think 2 days later went back and bought Dead End as well, as I recall, and that was it. That was just like, okay, so now I guess I'm collecting these things again. And I was totally blown away by them, needless to say.
I love that when you say lads holiday, you ended up in a Toys R Us.
Yeah.
Just like, not the stereotypical lads holiday at all.
Well, there was other stuff. I mean, there was, we did all the usual stuff as well, let's say. But there was a Toys R Us involved as well.
I remember my first trip to that Toys R Us was in 2007 after the movie BotCon, and the display that they had up for the first round of movie toys was unforgettable. It was quite amazing, quite a sight.
Yeah, no, it's a good old store, definitely. So
I've never been there, so I've been to one in Derby, if that helps.
You should check it out, Liam. Get yourself over to New York.
Well, it's not there anymore, is it?
Is it not? Is it closed?
Toys R Us is no longer a thing.
Oh, of course, I'm being dense. Of course, what am I thinking? It's been so funny. It's been so many years since I've really kind of gone out to retail and bought Transformers. That just kind of forget about that kind of stuff these days, if anything.
Well, actually, going to retail and buying Transformers is really closely tied to this entire line, isn't it? I mean, getting into this line, like Sixo, I had fallen out of collecting, and this was basically the start of my second phase of adult collecting. I'd collected from 1998 to 2003, and then I'd stopped in 2003, and it was all vintage G1 and Diaclone and things like that, and I'd gotten rid of a vast majority of it. And then I had just, it was actually a Toys R Us, the one in Brent Cross in North London, just had heard about these toys, and I'd seen that reveal of BT01, which was a Subaru Impreza. And I was so big into Gran Turismo at the time that all of these Japanese, these cars like the Mitsubishi Evo, the Subaru Impreza, Honda NSX, all of these cars, I was huge into these cars because of those video games. And seeing that Transformers was marrying a really famous race car with a famous racing livery again to a G1 character was really intriguing, but I wasn't collecting until I picked up an alternator smokescreen in that Toys R Us. Just like you, it was not something I'd set out to do. It just happened to be in the neighborhood. I thought, well, I wonder if this Toys R Us actually has those alternator thingies. And I went in and I saw it. I thought, yeah, I'll just grab it. Everyone said it's great. So it was definitely my gateway back into adult collecting as well in 2004.
Because you were still in the sort of the online Transformers fandom then, weren't you? You were on news groups and the like. What was the reaction like when Alternators and Binaltech were sort of revealed?
Well, that's the thing. I stopped collecting and participating around summer 2003. And obviously that was right at the moment where MP1 and BT01 were revealed. There was the sort of like the tease at SDCC that year. And then there was that flyer that appeared, the Pat Lee drawn flyer for Smokescreen. And then, of course, in the Japanese trade show was where the pictures came out of the resin prototype of MP1 and the colored version of BT01 Smokescreen with the rally livery on it. And so I was still in touch with a few people, mainly probably because I was still selling some of my collection off. So I was still in touch with collectors. And I thought it was really cool, and they were excited, but I was no longer participating in news groups, or I was actually on TFW during that time, so I didn't get involved in the discussions until a year afterwards.
Wow. Yeah, because it is kind of easy to forget. I know we were saying about Armada and Car Robots had been around, but we're still only like 2 or 3 years removed from like Beast Machines, aren't we? So there's been a long stretch where cars and Transformers, even though that's what we always relate them to, they weren't actually vehicles for such a long time, and it was still quite new. And especially to see them in licensed vehicle form was, again, well, not again, but you know what I mean, like realistic vehicles, was just amazing, wasn't it? Because we had Sideburn in RID, but it's not really the same, is it? But there was X-Brawn, wasn't there, as well? Yeah,
X-Brawn was based on an M-Class Mercedes. We had Prowl as well, which was originally based on Lambo Diablo. But so this, alternators would have been a return to licensed automotive vehicles, because I think Armada was not licensed vehicles; they were just make-believe vehicles, weren't they? The car modes.
Am I right in saying though that even with Car Robots or RID, that they were only licensed after, like as an afterthought? I don't think that they were licensed. I could be wrong, but my impression anyway was that my understanding was that they weren't licensed as part of the design. It was only when I think Hasbro released them as RID that the car manufacturer kind of said, hang on a minute.
They had a problem with it. That's right.
Yeah. And Takara got away with it for whatever reason, but that Hasbro had to get the license.
I think you're
and
right.
I think that was maybe the kind of precursor to conversations around licensing vehicles and what have you, and then that kind of down the way led to a joint effort between Takara and Hasbro to do alternators and Binaltech.
Yeah, because I think in the case of Expron, I think they changed the lights on the front to avoid having to do that. But with I know with Cyburn they had to add the the manufacturer, the vehicle manufacturer, but I'm pretty sure with Expron they got around it. But then that's why it leads into Binaltech, isn't it? Because they didn't want to have to go through this again, so they started then licensing vehicles. And it's just this. It's kind of even there when you look at RID and Car Robots. I know when the show isn't about that, but just seeing cars for the first time again, even though there's G1 toys in that toy line, the ones that feel the most G1 are actually those car brothers because they feel the most sort of spiritually similar, don't they? With the rubber tires and the sort of the realistic vehicle modes and stuff.
Absolutely right. Yeah, they did very much feel like a return to the line's roots.
Yeah, particularly after Beast Machines, which I think for a lot of people, and it's no slight against Beast Machines, but even for Beast Wars fans, it was kind of unrecognizable as really anything familiar for a lot of people. So I think it was at the time, I think particularly when alternators rolled round, I kind of get the feeling now retrospectively that people were just really hungry for that, and they just really kind of embraced it when they sort of saw it, and MP1 as well.
And of course, most of us who had been around in the 80s were reaching an age where we had a disposable income, and we maybe probably out of education by that point, and in work, and looking again to these kind of things and pursuits. So it was very well timed in that respect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There had been a sort of a disconnect a little bit, I think, with Beast Wars and Beast Machines, because they are Beast Wars and Beast Machines, aren't they? The Transformers branding is a lot smaller on the packaging, whereas when they went back to Car Robots, Transformers was massive on the packaging, wasn't it? Again, and I remember people at college when Robots in Disguise came out, they would say, "Oh, Transformers has come back." And it's like, well, no, it's been here, but people associate it with cars and stuff like that, so it felt more like it had returned, hadn't it?
Absolutely right. Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment for some of us, anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, it was also that, coming back to alternators, that it was the first, it did get me back into collecting, but it was the first Transformers line or toys that I collected really as an adult, so it was not, it felt separate in many ways. And I think because of the nature of them, the kind of high end of them, it was the first time as well that I realized that Takara, had very different toys and things like that. So there was always that element of trying to get the Japanese version, if you can import that or whatever. So that was like a big thing for that line, definitely. And they were the first toys. I was thinking about this earlier. They were the first toys that I was really happy as an adult to have on display in my house as well, or my flat as it was at the time. And that friends would come around or whatever, and I'd just be like, "Yeah, that's a thing. There you go." And I don't know, it feels very distinct in that way. Do you know what I mean? As like a different way of collecting to what I was used to previously.
Did you have that whole conversation with people who came round who just thought you were displaying die-cast vehicles of scale, and then you'd be like, "Oh, yeah, but they transform," and they were surprised because of how good the car modes looked?
Yeah, there was that, and there was MP3 as well, which was the classics for people making that assumption that they were just like scale models or whatever. MP3 more than any, I think. But no, actually a lot of alternators as well. They'd just be like, "Oh, okay, you've got some model cars," and they actually do transform. And you don't really get that anymore, because I think now Transformers is so prevalent that people just kind of expect it. Do you know what I mean? Whereas actually back then, it wasn't, as you sort of said, Liam, it wasn't everywhere in the same way. It was pre-2007, it was pre-movie, so it was a bit more subversive. And yeah, it was really interesting to see that kind of face of people that hadn't really thought about Transformers since the 80s, since they were a kid, suddenly realizing that this thing that was in front of them was a Transformer, and just kind of some people obviously, not fussed, but for a lot of people, actually quite a bit of delight in that as well, in seeing it. So it was interesting.
And it's very much seeing when you see it for the first time, it's very much seeing it through adult eyes as well, isn't it? Because they don't initially look like toys, do they? They do look like you were saying a minute ago, like models. And it's a very much like there's something about alternators where when you see it for the first time, it feels like Transformers have grown up with you. So it's gone from being the toys you had as a kid, but they still it's like that people always say, don't they? I had that Optimus Prime as a kid, when they see the Masterpiece one, and they didn't. And alternators has kind of got that similar vibe to it, because it looks like a car, and that's how the people sort of who don't really collect Transformers connect it, and if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think what you're saying about they look grown up and recognizable to people I mean, the choice of car models was a big deal in that as well.
They're all
They were picking
contemporary, aren't
yeah, that's right. And I mean, they were going to launch Binaltech with Streak, the Silver Streak, the road going version of the Subaru mold. But towards release, they decided to switch it out for the much more fancy looking Smokescreen, which was a globally recognizable championship winning rally car. And it was recognizable to Brits because obviously, Colin McRae had driven for the Subaru team. And, there were British champions, Richard Burns as well. So these, that was a recognizable car to a lot of people, motorsport fans, just people who maybe followed sports,
Video games
cars generally.
with Colin McRae Rally was massive at that time, wasn't it?
Absolutely right. Sega Rally as well, things like that. So that was a really eye-catching release to start the line with, because you wouldn't consider Smokescreen a blue ribbon character to launch a major toy line for Transformers.
Yeah, that's true. I remember actually at the time or just before that, actually, my stepdad had a Subaru Impreza, bizarrely. And it was a very cool thing to see it in toy form, as you can imagine. It didn't have all the livery and all of that kind of stuff on it, obviously, but still a lot of fun.
Well, yeah, I guess Streak would have been really cool.
Yeah. Actually, funnily enough, my stepdad's was blue, but still.
Terrific. My brother and I lusted after an Impreza, man. I think he wanted to buy one on many occasions.
I can remember exactly where I first saw Binaltech Smokescreen, but what about you? Where did you first see it, M.A.S.K?
For me, it was the online pictures for the reveal, because just like I said, I was just on my way out of the hobby. And I didn't see a Binaltech in person until after I bought Alternator Smokescreen, Toys R Us, Brent Cross, North London in 2004. And I remember it was a weird feeling to buy a Transformer at retail again, and quite such a big thing as well. And I didn't expect it to lead to collecting a line. I just thought, I love Subaru Imprezas, especially rally cars. It's a car that my brother and I would always try to get in Gran Turismo when we were playing. It's like you knew when a Gran Turismo game had taken off because you had your first Impreza in game. So that was it was like a completely different thing. It was supposed to be like a standalone thing. I had stopped collecting, but obviously that didn't quite work out that way. But Alternators was the first one I had. And I'd seen all that stuff about, it's just plastic. It doesn't have the beautiful pearlescent, sparkly blue or the die-cast of the Binaltech. But it was such a good toy anyway. It was so impressive that I could really appreciate Alternator Smokescreen as a toy. And that led me to then buy Binaltech Dead End as a sort of, all right, I'm going to give this one more go and see how much I love it. And I was completely sold by the time Dead End came out and I had it.
Dead End was a really good toy, man. Dead End was just great. I mean, it was so funny because actually I remember only reading, latterly that it was supposed to be Sunstreaker, of course.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, I owned the thing at that point, and shows you my level of engagement with the whole thing. I loved it, but it just hadn't at all occurred to me that it was supposed to represent Sunstreaker. It was only I remember reading it on the internet and being like, "Oh yeah, that totally makes sense."
It was those test shots that were turning up so frequently before release, and there was a red unpainted test shot of the Viper mold with Sunstreaker's head, and on the chest he had an Autobot logo. So everyone surmised that this was supposed to be Sunstreaker, and then a last minute change of course to pad up the Decepticon ranks, because this was, I think it was BT05 by that point. The Binaltech had already gotten 4 releases in, and it was all Autobot cars, and then Dead End was supposed to start balancing it out a little bit.
Yeah, it was an interesting one, and then obviously Swindle as well. I think in some ways that was kind of what attracted me a little bit, though, was that it wasn't just Autobots, but they had Decepticons, but that they were choosing some weird characters as well. Not that Swindle and Dead End are necessarily that unusual, but certainly coming back into it for the first time, it seemed quite intriguing to me. Like, oh, okay, which other characters are they going to do then? I quite like that.
Yeah, because there are all sorts of sort of random names that turn up, like Decepticharge, aren't they? Characters, because it's very connected to G1, but then there are these just completely random characters that appear in there, aren't there?
We're jumping ahead now, big time.
Decepticharge.
Add the teasers.
Jumping way ahead now. Yeah.
Decepticharge is way down the line. That's like.
But I mean, there was resistance to this stuff. I remember distinctly conversations with people who were disappointed that it was Dead End instead of Sunstreaker, that it was Swindle instead of Trailbreaker. There were disappointed parties on almost every stage of Binaltech and Alternators after Smokescreen. People were disappointed at the Sideswipe that came out as the Dodge Viper, because I think initially that was supposed to be Trax.
Yeah.
So
Right.
there was always like this element of not everyone is really satisfied with the way this is going, and I remember that distinctly throughout this period. So I really liked Dead End because I thought it looked, it looked amazing. Really amazing looking job they did on that one. I don't think Sunstreaker stood a chance after Dead End had robbed that mold off him.
I was just going to say, as well as resistance from fans, they had resistance from the actual manufacturers, didn't they, of the cars? For the same reason. That's why Jazz was the original toy, wasn't he, designed for the line, but he was never released because Porsche wouldn't allow it.
That's right, the Porsche Jazz, yeah.
And this is the origin of the phrase, isn't it? With they won't allow it for war toys or whatever it is, and this is where it all springs from, is this toy.
Yeah, it's funny, that war toys thing, because it's very of its time. I mean, they were kind of saying, weren't they, that Transformers was not worthy of the Porsche trademark or whatever. And people have really latched onto that war toys quote. It's so funny because I remember every time the subject of a masterpiece Jazz comes up, it's like, oh, well, they don't want war toys and all of this. But it's like, I think it's really of its time. And I mean, what would that have been now? It would have been, well, the better part of 20 years ago. So, we really don't know, other than just speculation, what's going on behind the scenes with Masterpiece Jazz.
The Porsche brand team, the merchandising brand team is probably not made up of the same people now that it was made up of 18 years ago.
It definitely won't be. It definitely won't. Well, I'm assuming. I mean, again, it's just speculation. But
there's just one dude hanging on. No robots. One guy.
The rest of the Transformers fans desperate to stealth their way in there to get this toy
keep
made.
Asking, this guy just won't retire. It's like a big bugbear for Hashtag. Right. I don't know. But it's just funny how that one quote has lived in infamy and refuses to go away.
And it's still cited to this day, isn't it? As empirical evidence of why they think it does.
It's almost like a rule of TFW 2005 that someone has to quote it at least once a month in Masterpiece forums. They have to bring it around again.
I saw that Porsche in person at the Rhode Island Hasbro factory tour in 2007. I saw that.
Oh, the prototype?
Yeah, and they also had a smaller smoke screen, almost a deluxe class smoke screen.
I've seen the picture.
Super.
See the picture, because they were. My understanding again is that they were fiddling around with the scale, weren't they? And there was some discussion between Hasbro and Takara about what scale they wanted the cars to be,
right?
And before settling on 1:24, and that they made this other prototype which was much smaller. It looked to me, I've only seen pictures of it, but I don't know what your impression of it in hand. Well, not in hand, but seeing it in person, Maz, was.
Did you break it?
I've got a story about breaking an Alternators prototype.
Of course you do.
I knew you would have.
I wasn't even on the same continent. But we got to come back to that story later.
And yet,
the only show notes we should ever have on this podcast has Maz broken one of his toys?
Let me just tell you that when Maz and I were both in the scene of getting third-party test shots and what have you, if ever I discovered that one was turning up to me to review after Maz, I was like, oh man, what state is it going to be?
I would just damage it enough to not make it visible, so that when you transformed it the first time, you take the blame for busting it.
You booby trapped it for him.
Yes. Fans, toys, and Insecticons turning up with broken wings and all kinds. Honestly.
That's why you kept getting unidentified cuts and bruises off these toys. I'd sabotage them before sending them to him to review.
Gluing little razor blades to them and painting them.
Well, I think Fans Toys Spotter made us both bleed in the end, didn't it?
Oh man, that thing. I mean, it's totally off topic, but that thing was just ugh. Yeah, we'll have to do another episode one day of third-party test shots or something.
Oh,
do you know what I mean?
Because I cannot wait.
It's a whole topic. I
had that same test shot as well, and I remember that just how painful it was trying.
That's true. That one really did the rounds, didn't it? Yeah.
And those Insecticons.
It was hideous.
Yeah. But were you about to ask me what my impression was of the complexity of that smaller?
Well, I was going to say more the scale, actually, was what you thought the smaller scale was comparable to in hand, whether it was like Generations or Masterpiece or where you kind of...
That's a good one, actually. the smaller smokescreen, nowhere near a masterpiece. I think it didn't even look as intricate as the Alternity toys that came later, if I'm honest.
Well, I had wondered that as well, if that was maybe like Takara eventually settling on a smaller scale, but to me, it looked smaller than Alternity.
Yeah, it looked a bit like the transformation was going to be marginally more complicated than like a Legion class is today or something like that. Probably wouldn't have been a million miles away from Titan's Return wheelie in complexity.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I suppose not far down the road from here, they start doing the titanium toys, don't they? And there are a whole bunch of those they didn't release as well, like the Cosmos and stuff. And you see the grey prototypes of those. And they're not far from there, so I wonder if there's any connection there.
But I do remember on that tour, the one thing that really did get my heart beating fastest was the Porsche Jazz prototype for Binaltech. That was the most impressive thing I saw on that tour.
Did you see it in car mode?
No.
I was just going to ask that same question.
I've always been fascinated because obviously you only ever see the prototype, the robot mode, but you never see the car, and I've always wondered what it looked like.
It was either going to be one of the new 911s or a Cayman. I can't remember which, but no, it was in robot mode, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was a non-transforming one, actually. Like just glued parts and puttied parts or something
Action
like
Master.
That, screwed together. Yeah.
Yeah, it did look cool. Because we did get old Meister eventually, but still, it was just like one of those legendary toys, wasn't it? That so many people used to talk about.
It's amazing because there's also a Bumblebee, wasn't there? Am I right in thinking that there was a Bumblebee prototype?
I thought it was just concept artwork, but
yeah, I thought it was just concept art as well.
Because apparently, from what I read, there's the three, aren't they? Was it Trax? Oh no, it's Smokescreen, wasn't it? And then Bumblebee and Jazz. They're the original three, and two of them didn't get made.
That's believable based on the drawings that were in that Binaltech book that came out. But I mean, no, that line was a big deal at the time. It was a really big deal. It was really big news every time a test shot would appear on eBay. And the test shots were always well in advance of any announcement. And I must admit, I was made to feel quite guilty by members of the fandom for buying some of those test shots. Because, it was before the YouTube review kind of phenomena. But those of us who were winning those test shots off eBay, we would do photographs and get them online. I would do a review maybe for tf1.com or something, and then the hits and the likes and stuff would roll in, and you'd get a news credit on the front of TFW, and it was a massive deal.
Ooh.
Yeah, I remember this so clearly. There was really big news on TFW every time like a test shot would come out. Who's that character? Who's it going to be? Obviously, like the dead end Sunstreaker thing was the first major one that I remember. It was a really big deal. Then there was also Trax as BT06 because we got that in yellow as Binaltech, but I think there were test shots of Trax in yellow for alternators. Do you remember that whole thing about the plastic was considered to be too translucent for release?
Yeah.
I remember a friend of mine. He just sent me a picture over Facebook of like he'd pulled his drawer open and there was a alternators yellow Trax test shot in there, and I just said, "How and where did you get that?" And he just wouldn't say. He goes, "Man, it's just in my drawer." He just closed the drawer. I remember that really clearly. But that was the thing. It was like this was a line that could potentially be completed, and it was a line of car robots. And man, if you ever tried to complete Diaclone car robots, you know that no one was ever going to do that. And this was a line that felt like it could complete. So every variant that turned up, every test shot was that amazing mold in another color, and it was like, yeah, must try to track them down. And they were really well known, the test shots as well. It wasn't like today where if you pop onto eBay, you've got a multitude of prototypes and stuff. Back then, people knew each and every one, and they were being documented and photographed, and then they'd be on eBay, and people would go for them. And they were going for quite a lot of money.
Do I was wondering how quickly this discussion would turn into one of variants and prototypes and things like that.
But that was a big deal with alternators and Binaltech.
It really was, yeah.
That's pretty much how that those lines exist, isn't it? Or coexist is the differences. That's more what they are than anything else. It's not the similarities. It's what separates them.
Yeah, and what we don't get.
Yeah.
Because it's such a homogenous line. It's like it wasn't just a couple of cars and then some jets and a dinosaur and and a building. It was all cars. So everything that we didn't get was a what?
I'm just laughing at your description of traditional Transformers. Then some jets, some cars, a dinosaur, and a building.
He's been watching Big, hasn't he? That's what it is.
Yes.
It's G1
so if
Tom
we-
Hanks.
So if we didn't get a particular car, it was a big deal. If we didn't get a particular character. So those test shots were like people's way of filling out their collections of these awesome car robots.
I could see that. It'd be a big part of the fun. I wasn't there for any of that. I was just, as I say, picking up the hobby again, really, at that point. But I could totally see the sort of intrigue of trying to figure out which character was going to be next and all of that, and the different car models. I think it's a lot of fun.
Hey, don't flip out. Transformers Generation 2 will be right back.
So when you were picking it up, Sixo, for the first time, like you're saying, you weren't really into the fandom at that point. What was it that drew you in when you had it in your hands with the car?
I think it was just the feeling that this was something familiar. So, I mean, as I say, the first two I got was Swindle and Dead End, both the Alternators versions. And I wasn't even aware of, Takara doing the die-cast metal ones and all of that gubbins at that stage. But I think it was just the feeling that, this was something familiar, that it felt like the Transformers that I knew, come back. And I say that as someone that had been a big fan of Beast Machines. Beast Wars, actually. I mean, Beast Machines less, I will say. But Beast Wars I had really liked a lot. And, I had a couple of RID toys as well, I think. But not really. I suppose it's not actually that much of a gap. It's funny. I think of it in my brain as like a long gap, between the two. Whereas actually, I guess it was probably just a couple of years. Although I very much doubt that it was 2003 for me when I picked up Alternators, probably 2004. So maybe like 3 years or something gap. But I think it was that feeling of return to familiarity, characters that you knew, like Swindle, what have you, even if they were kind of like not A-list. But also that feeling of complexity to them. And it's funny because actually now, looking back at the toys, they're not actually that complex. Like they're not the most intricate transformations. Stuff like Masterpiece and whatever has really usurped that and kind of overtaken it in terms of the complexity of transformations and parts count and whatever else. But there was a feeling of this being somehow kind of a line that had a kind of respectability about it, with the little interiors and the seats and the steering wheels and the rubber tires and all of that kind of gumph. And I think that really appealed a bit as well. It wasn't like, oh, these are just children's toys. Although actually now that distinction doesn't bother me at all. I think at the time, to kind of come back into the line, that somehow felt important. Does that sort of make sense?
It does, because it captures that sort of sense of magic as well, doesn't it? The mystery of how you've got the car interiors and all of that detail, and it still turns into a robot. Because particularly now, you're so used to, once the car is closed, all the robot parts are just squished in there. There's no interiors. Even with most masterpieces, you don't get that. And so back then, it felt very G1 in that the first time you saw it, you're like, how does this happen? And it brought back that same sort of sense of magic, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it was just that feeling of like, imagine them doing X and Y character, from your childhood, but doing them in this form, this size, this kind of impressive large size with all of this realistic interior and whatever else. It just felt very exciting and like it had a ton of potential. If anything, and this is maybe a little bit of a controversial statement, I suppose my disappointment with Alternators and Binaltech is that it never really kind of got to that potential. Do you know what I mean? Like we had some really cool toys along the way, and I'm not disappointed to see stuff like, I don't know, Sideswipe as a particular model of car, or to see Decepticharge and made up characters or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. I suppose what I'm saying is that it never got as big as it potentially could have been, and it never fleshed out as much as it maybe could have done if it had had more success. But still, it's a very cool line. And for that initial time, like, getting into it, it felt like, wow, this could be huge. It could really kind of go anywhere.
It's a really funny one because last night I read through all the articles I wrote on this subject, and I had done it sequentially from BT1 to BT18, and it was amazing to read because it felt like I was reading history, because I was remembering all the things that were coming up in the community and in my own feelings when I was buying these toys. And I was so big into this line to the point where I was buying bootlegs because they were in different colors. the Chinese company called
Really?
Metals. They did this brand called Metals Transform. So they did like Hound, but in white. They did Sideswipe, but in yellow. So, there were these amazing little gaps being filled. And these bootlegs were sold so widely. I remember going to, I think it was Mallorca in 2006. And even seaside shops there, souvenir shops, had knockoff Binaltechs. In this
when I went to
Metals
Spain, I
Transform
saw
packaging.
exactly the same thing. Exactly the same.
And just reading through those articles, I was like, wow, there's so much to say on the topic. So it's really hard because at the moment we're discussing it in a bit of a scattershot fashion. So I'm trying to remember what I wanted to say about particular elements of the line when they come up. But just Sixo saying how complicated those transformations felt at the time. The one example that really brings that home to me is actually RID Sideburn. I remember at the time that toy was considered a monster. But you pick up that robot today and it's like, well, that was nothing. Compare that to a Masterpiece Sunstreaker.
I was just going to say, I agree with you, Sixo, when you were saying about how it never felt like it reached its potential. I know we're jumping forward a little bit, but it does feel like there was so much left on the table. I mean, it is great that it's very self-contained, as Maz was saying. So it's very small and easy to collect to some degree, but it does feel like they never, I don't know, there are so many hits, particularly toward the end with like Mirage and stuff. And you think, what could they have done next?
I think Mirage was one of the sort of latter day truly exciting new molds for me. That was one.
Are we really discussing Mirage less than halfway into the episode?
Yeah,
we're going to go for it, man. This is climax of the entire line, and we're talking about it now. Before we've talked about Grimlock or Battle Ravage.
You told me this was going to veer off into topics that
all right.
I was not planning for.
I'm not. Well, we'll come back to Mirage. I wasn't really meaning to talk about Mirage specifically. More just that it was, it represented, as you say, the kind of last hurrah, if you like, of a new mold. It was kind of the one. I don't think it was the last new mold, was it, mind you? But still, it was the one that I remember being like, wow, this looks fantastic. And I'm trying to think if that was last or if
it wasn't the last Alternators mold, but it was the last new mold that came out under the Binaltech banner.
Right. Okay. I wasn't sure if it was that one or Convoy, but but it was a great mold anyway. And as you say, we'll talk about it in a bit. But I remember there being a point where it was kind of like new releases were coming out, and it was like, oh, okay, another repaint. That's cool, fine. And I think that's kind of what I mean by that feeling of it faltering a little bit, do you know what I mean? And just kind of not really reaching that potential as such.
But like I was saying, I was reading back through these things, and I had cut it into 4 release chunks, like BT 1 to 4, BT 5 to 9, that sort of thing. And I remember there was periods of time where we would get like 2 or 3 releases in a row, like you said, were repaints, and there was nothing really new going on. But then all of a sudden, we'd get like a lot of new things in one go. For example, we got Grimlock as the Ford Mustang. Mustang mold was new. And then we had Overdrive, which is one of my absolute favorite toys of the line. And that, to me, was an enormous highlight of the entire line. And that was well past the stage where people had decided that it had peaked, much earlier. We got Overdrive. And it's funny because the test shots of that did not really reveal who that was going to be. And you remember the test shot had the really long sniper rifle that became the Diaclone. Then for the Hasbro release, we got Windcharger first. Yeah,
they muted it.
Yeah, and I remember buying repros. So people had made a repro, and I bought one of those for my Hasbro Windcharger. Now, funnily, that the Hasbro Windcharger had the visor on upside down. But then when we got the BT12, I think it was 12 Overdrive, that was in glossy red. It had the sniper rifle. And it had the visor the right way up, and it was so clearly Overdrive. And it was such an amazing highlight and high point of the line. It was such a good transformation too. For everything that Grimlock was frustrating and fiddly, and you were constantly dodging flying doors and arms and things that kept popping off that toy, Overdrive was totally different. And even Windcharger was really, really good.
Do you know the one that I really love that's a sort of I suppose at the end of that 2003-4 era was Prowl. That was the one for me that I remember, newer mold just being totally smitten with. And one that I got a Binaltech version of. It was kind of looking for which versions I could get from Takara or whatever, which you could kind of import. And that one, I just remember thinking, wow, this is a real knockout. Very different take on the character and whatever else, but just really good.
I think that was originally supposed to be Red Alert because they were going to do Prowl as another Subaru, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, that was a really nice toy. And that was like Binaltech at its best. It was, again, another very well-known Japanese sports car, the Integra Type R, and a really well-known Transformers character in Prowl. And it was just like married those two things up beautifully. And it was funny because Prowl was the point where the packaging changed. Do you remember? It stopped having the grid packaging. Suddenly it was like it was mostly white box, and on the box the pictures were like of a street scene. So it was much more. I wonder if at that point they were trying to appeal to a different audience and just be like, no, this is like your regular street car now, but it's a Transformer, instead of just going full on grid pattern box, name and function bar like the old days Transformers logo. It was like for Skids and Prowl, we had this different Binaltech packaging.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Part of like a reboot of the line, though, wasn't it? Because
yes, it was. It come a bit later than the other one, just before it too.
It was like a refresh because I don't think it was selling very well, was it? So they thought they'd refresh it and give it another chance. And then, because didn't they then bring in? They sort of reissued some of the more rarer toys, didn't they? Some of the previous molds, which then became sort of shelf warmers later on.
You mean in alternators?
Yeah.
Yeah, because alternators went through a big packaging change as well. They went from the big red and blue boxes to the bubble boxes. Yeah, and then like Grimlock came out again, Trax came out again, Jazz came out again. Yeah, and with new artwork as well.
And then, with Binaltech, they were on to Asterisk, weren't they?
Right, after Skids.
Yeah, after Skids.
See, that's the thing. Like, Prowl was amazing, and Skids was amazing. So in that short period of time, we had like Overdrive, Prowl, Skids, Grimlock, Laserwave as well. Do you remember like the Shockwave repaint of Jazz was beautiful.
It's weird. It's weird how it kind of went in those little waves. Do you think that was because of licensing? Do you think that was just like them? They got out, Smokescreen and Hound and that initial lot because they had those sort of. They had like a little wave of initial designs, didn't they? And then do you think it was just the question that they were like, okay, now we need to sort out some more licenses? So they were like, check out a couple of repaints for a little while and whatever, whilst we line that up. And that might explain whilst we got a sudden little flurry.
I don't know if it was the fact that they then went looking for them, because I know with Jazz, with Meister, Mazda kept sending back the design documents and being like, no, you could alter this a bit more to be more in proportion with the real car. Because I think that like the original design wasn't quite, it wasn't 100% accurate. So, and because it was a scale model line, Mazda were quite insistent that they would get it absolutely right for the RX-8. So I think maybe that sometimes held up some of the releases, just that design process. Like with some of that sentiment that it was beginning to get stale and that the line was dying, they would then all of a sudden come out with a massive new vehicle license, like Honda and the biggest car manufacturer in the world, Toyota, with Skids. It was like, they're still really going for this, and Skids was a brand new mold and a really special mold. It was great. And the
really, really good toy.
Was even better.
The only thing I didn't like about Skids was the stickers. I had the Binaltech one again, and I put the stickers on, and they were just not up to snuff. I remember them just like peeling off. Rather unfortunately, I was always a bit disappointed with that. I think in some ways just wish I hadn't done that. But I really liked the look of the sort of plainer look to the fiery one that Hasbro had. But yeah, still a really, really great mold. I loved it. It always looked like Ironhide to me. And I'm still not sure to this day if that was ever intentional or not.
I think it was supposed to be Ironhide.
Right. And it doesn't surprise me at all.
Or was it the Dodge Ram that was supposed to be Ironhide?
Honestly, I don't know. But I remember looking at Skids at the time and thinking, this looks like Ironhide to me, even the face.
Definitely got its profile, hasn't it?
Right.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe, actually it's funny because I remember hearing the Dodge Ram and Ironhide, hearing that as a connection. But again, I'm sure I remember hearing something about that and Trailbreaker as well. But
Trailbreaker is Swindle, I remember.
Yeah,
was
a one.
And then also, we were talking about Overdrive, but the repaint of that in Alternators, Decepticharge that you mentioned earlier, I believe that was supposed to be Megatron. In a grey color. And if you think about the head sculpt of Decepticharge, it's kind of Megatron-y. Do you remember the test shot for that toy? It was all dirty, and it had like the black paint on it, and it was called Dirty Decepticharge at the time. And then when the toy actually got released, it was completely yellow with the detailing on it, the sports detailing, but it didn't have like the dirt and the muck on it.
Do you know, I was going to say I don't remember that, but it does ring a bell, actually. I remember seeing, but only now that you mention it, I wouldn't have recollected that otherwise. But I do remember seeing pictures of, but it was still yellow, right? But with like a,
It was still
with
yellow.
Like, yeah, it's still yellow, but with a kind of
painted hood
on it or whatever.
number 4 on it, I think, as well. The muddy pattern is what they removed from the test shot stage. Yeah.
Right, I do remember it. Vaguely anyway. But that would have been cool.
There were so many. Hesitate to say famous, but really well-known test shots for that line. There was so much attention on everything they were doing in the community.
Paparazzi chasing them and all that.
I remember I had the Meister test shot as well, which was really cool because they did it in all sorts of wacky colors, like grey, blue, pink, different parts on it, and they were always so crazy floppy as well, with big "not for sale" molded into like the chest piece or something like that. It was so cool.
Not for sale, but for stealing.
That's what they were. They were stolen samples. There's no two ways about it. I mean, like I said, there was backlash from the community, from certain people when I would do photos and when I would own these toys, because at the end of the day, what we were doing was encouraging the continual stealing and sale of these toys.
Yeah, so if you are looking at alternators and Binaltech, you will notice they are very different toys, aren't they? I mean, there are obviously they're similar, but there are a lot of differences. Why is that?
The biggest difference probably started with the very first release. You know, the smokescreen looked really different as an alternator compared to the Binaltech. It was flat blue, no glossy, sparkly blue of the accurate Japanese version. There was no die cast. And, that stayed quite consistently different all the way through. It was always such a bugbear of mine where people said, don't buy Binaltechs because they'll just chip the paint. And I kept looking at my collection even 10 years afterwards going, I don't see any paint chips. Once you figured out how to transform them and you weren't smacking parts of die cast together during transformation, you could manage any paintwear. I mean, I still have the same Binaltech smokescreen GT version from 2004 that I bought from Epic Heroes in Edgeware back in the day. And it doesn't have any paint chips. And that thing has moved house with me 3 times.
Wait, you've not broken that toy, is what you're saying?
I
This is
never broke a Binaltech.
fictional characters. That's what's happening here.
Yeah, interesting.
But it does. Do you think that goes back to something we were saying earlier about how this felt like the first sort of toy line that was targeted more at, collectors and grown-ups more than kids? And part of that is because those toys, they sort of teach you, maybe not intentionally, that you sort of have to handle them with finesse, doesn't it, with the transformation, rather than just grabbing bits and yanking bits. You do learn that through those toys. Because I've got, like you, I've got a Binaltech smokescreen that our lovely friend Dom got for me and stuff, but I've never chipped it. But it's because I know how to handle it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I understand that figure with its diecast was pretty heavy, and it did have a tendency to topple. And, if it topples the wrong way, it's going to chip the paint. So, yeah, you did have to pay attention to it. And I definitely got the feeling that the Binaltech was a collector-aimed line, whereas Alternators was sold in Toys R Us. So it's sold to children. It was, you see them pop up in collections and secondhand all the time. Same with Masterpiece, really. If you think about it, we had the MP1 was sold in Toys R Us. You still see them in like collections of toys. Someone might list on Gumtree, just a stack of old Transformers, and there's an MP1 in there, missing an arm or something, or finger, poxy finger. But MP1 was branded as a collector's item. It was an anniversary item. Actually, even the Hasbro one was branded as an anniversary item, wasn't it?
It's the movie
20th anniversary of
20th. It was cool 20th anniversary. Yeah.
But yeah, that was a big difference between Binaltech and Alternators. And then, of course, some Binaltech figures suffered greatly for having the diecast. I recall the Mazda mold, my Shockwave, the Laser Wave. When I got that toy, I was blown away. It was just stunning. It wore the mold even better than Jazz did. And it's amazing how Binaltech managed to make the Decepticons look evil in car mode without emblazoning Decepticon insignias on the hoods or anything like that. They just looked mean. You looked at Laserwave, you're like, yeah, that's a Decepticon. You looked at Dead End, it was like, that's a Decepticon. You just knew. And the number plate had a little Decepticon symbol on it for Swindle, but you just knew.
They did a fantastic job with choosing cars that fit,
right.
didn't they?
Really, really well, yeah. Even the ones that didn't end up being what they were supposed to. Like, sure, Trax might have been a Dodge Viper, but he's so good as the Corvette. I mean, now looking back, how could he not be a Corvette? And I really liked how those car manufacturers insisted that Takara release a version of the toy in a flagship color for that brand. That's why we got a yellow Corvette.
Like
and the red Mazda.
Do you know, it's funny. I often talk about that yellow Corvette because actually I really wish that yellow Trax was a thing. You know, I really wish that we saw more. I would love to see a Generation 1 toy of Trax in yellow. I would just think that would look gorgeous. I would love to see a masterpiece version of Trax in yellow. Again, I think that would look stunning. But it's never been carried over. But yeah, I really... it sort of appeals to the collector of me to see those characters done in those weird colours, even if they're the flagship car colours, as you say. But that was something I always really appreciated.
And how much they actually really looked like those characters, like yellow Trax, the head sculpt and the fact that it was a Corvette, and then the big rockets, it was Trax. It was yellow, but man, it had the right character. And there is a Generation 1 yellow Trax, but it's a prototype.
I knew it was coming.
Yeah,
I knew it.
I don't have it. I know who did have it, but it was a prototype from the classic era of G1, from the gold box.
Oh, really?
I didn't know that.
Did you know that the prototype of G1 Hot Rod was pink?
I did know that. Yeah, we may have mentioned it previously, but that's a whole thing. They should do that.
Just want to keep it in the consciousness,
I mean,
timely reminder.
I have got a note to say how disappointed I am that Binaltech and Alternators Hot Rods also weren't pink.
No, they never are. They never are. They should really get on that and make more Hot Rods pink.
Just one. See, you test the waters. So we've mentioned the yellow Trax and the red Zoom Meister, both stipulations from the automotive company that the license was obtained from. But we also had the blue Prowl. And I always thought it was weird that Prowl never had a blue head. So it was just like blue Prowl with the white head. But that was vivid blue pearl color, which was a Honda Integra. Actually, the thing is, the Honda Integra Type Rs are normally just white. Most Type R cars from Honda were just white, but obviously Prowl was already white. So the next best thing was the vivid blue pearl version. But that was that one that came from the car company. And
they said they wanted a
I'm
blue
pretty
one?
sure. I'm pretty sure. And obviously it was just, it was at that point where nearly every Binaltech was coming in two colors. So, and they started really distinctly with Trax, and then, Jazz came in two colors. The second Smokescreen came in two variants.
I'm surprised that they didn't do a different character for the blue Prowl, because like with Skids, they did Broad Blast and whatever,
but that wasn't a co-release. The thing was the Broad Blast wasn't a co-release. But even with the Jazz, like you said, it was Zoom. It was kind of a different character.
True. Yeah. Well, yeah, to some extent. And then obviously you got Wheeljack and Grimlock. There was a little bit of difference between, I guess they weren't, again, the same time, where there was a bit of difference, bit of time between those two.
That's right, yeah. It was BT10 versus BT16 or something like that. No. 14. 14 was Wheeljack. Yeah.
14. So I had BT Wheeljack, and actually that was the one. I had two, just coming back to the paint chip thing, I had two Binaltechs that had paint chipping, a little bit. And one was Wheeljack. Which is perhaps not surprising when you consider that transformation.
Right.
I think there was definitely some frustration along the way with that toy, getting it between modes. And I think at some point I just managed to scuff it slightly on I can't remember where, or maybe on the bonnet. And the other one that had a small paint chip, tiny, almost imperceptible, ironically, was Sunstreaker, which he would have been very annoyed about, I'm sure.
Right.
But it had the tiniest paint chip, again, I think just kind of somewhere quite prominent. I can't remember if it's on the bonnet or where it was. And I don't think it was me that caused it. I can't remember how it happened, or if it was out the box like that or what have you. But it was just really quite gutting, actually. I remember the bit. I loved Binaltech Asterix. Sunstreaker, loved it, but I remember being quite dismayed by this one paint chip.
That was actually, we were talking about differences between Hasbro and Takara. The Grimlock and Wheeljack. Remember the Hasbro versions didn't have any chrome, but the Takara versions had the chrome on the engines and the chrome on the hubs. And I always found it really funny that Wheeljack came with the sword. Like, okay, I understand Grimlock's coming with the sword, and then they just chuck the sword in with Wheeljack. But of course, that makes sense now when you look at TF Prime. Wheeljack comes with the 2 katanas. So
for science, isn't it? It's all for science.
Right.
It's a
It's
sword
pointer.
of science.
Yeah.
Yes,
I would have been annoyed
yeah.
if it hadn't come with it, though. I think I would have been annoyed as like, well, it comes with Grimlock. Why not with Wheeljack?
I don't know why I always kind of prefer that mold as Wheeljack than Grimlock.
That's interesting. I mean, I remember people were really annoyed that it didn't have the Alitalia colors, and it was just that trying to remind people like this isn't Generation 1. You can't just you can, but it would have looked really funny to take a Ford Mustang and just slap a different company's livery over it. Because again, that Ford Mustang was white with blue stripes. That's a really, really signature Ford, souped up color scheme. And people were just, they were taking the Binaltech Jazz and the Hasbro Jazz and putting Martini stickers on it. You remember like Repro labels were, they were just churning out these stickers for alternators to make them even more G1. I never went for that.
The Jazz, don't they, in the Repro labels layout as their sort of stand-in for Masterpiece, don't they?
That Repro label set for Jazz was big time. Even I remember that being a thing. It was a big old thing at the time for sure, which was really interesting.
Yeah, people really did want them to look like G1 cars.
It's just crazy.
A certain group of them.
It defeats so much of the object of what those toys are there for, isn't it? Really, it's just.
I felt that way at the time too. I felt like people should embrace it for what it is and stop marking it down on a lack of G1 accuracy.
Yeah, because
isn't that what we still do today, though?
Yeah, but there's no shortage of it now, though, is there?
Too much. That's true. I think all of this discussion is, and I kind of hope it comes across maybe for, at the risk of saying it, for younger people that may be listening or whatever, because I think the context of all of this is very important, and it is, I think, crucial to remember, because I've forgotten as well that all of this was a totally different time. It was pre everything that we know about Transformers now.
It was pre-classics.
Well, exactly. No classics, no 2007 movie, none of that. None of the current like Kingdom and Earthrise and multiple versions of Optimus Prime and whatever.
Masterpiece wasn't a line. Masterpiece was an occasional release. Yeah.
It was literally one toy at the time.
Yes, that's right.
You had MP1 in 2003. And then
Magnus,
what was it? 2, and then Magnus, and that was it. So by this point, I mean, yes, then you got MP3, and that
but that was 2006 until we got MP3.
That was 2006, yeah, 2006.
And then we got another MP1.
Yeah,
with the trailer.
It was definitely not a line, and I think it's weird now. I mean, how many Masterpiece releases do we get a year now? And people are like, oh, we should get more. And people are just clamoring for more stuff all the time, but back then it really was like you could get 2 or 3 of these toys and you would just be overjoyed. It was just like, oh my god, this is like manna from heaven almost.
Oh no, I was just going to say, it's such a stark contrast to now, like you were saying, like almost every taste is catered for, isn't it, in the Transformers fandom? Like whatever you're into, you can almost get anything you want. And back then it was just like you say, it was such a rarity. These things were so new and exciting. It was just
exactly. And I think for me, it's really imagining now, like the scenario now where people are like, oh, which is better, the Masterpiece version or the Generations, or probably there's like a third one, and whatever, which Optimus Prime do you like? There are like 10 coming out in the next 3 months. That is just so far away from where we were at the time. I mean, this is a line that didn't even have an Optimus Prime for the first 3 years of it, right? So it's just that's where this was at the time, and kind of how things were. And I think for me, I think wanting slavish G1 accuracy from it, as you said, Maz, kind of misses the point a little bit of what was going on with it. And
and to consider that the line started with a toy that did not have a G1 deco. It launched with the most contemporary racing version of that car that could have existed, and that was the point. It was an update. It was new, but with the most blatant nods to G1 that we had since ever. Really in a new toy line. I mean, I read something I wrote last night, which really surprised me. Is that the Binaltech asterisk alert was the first time that a red alert had been released with a red head.
Yeah, I remember the red head
Really?
fuss. That was a big thing. Yeah,
Like,
I remember that.
I mean, okay, it was Blue Streak's head in red on the Subaru, but it was still like, that is red alert as a police car as well, not as a fire chief, but with a red head.
But that shows that whoever made that decision had some love for the franchise. They had some love for the original cartoon, for the original fiction, beyond just the toys and whatever. There was, the love was there, and it was pouring through just in an updated form.
There was so much love in that fiction, and I'm going to be the one to bring up Beast Wars this week. You know what I'm going to talk about.
Did you get the vampires?
Yes, BT-11 Ravage. Remember that was like
Right.
a real what moment, because it was a black tracks. And the thing
with
is,
the Ravage head.
it even had Diaclone nods. I mean, the rocket launchers were grey on a black tracks. It was like, I know what you're doing there. I know what you're doing. And then it had Ravage's head. And it was like, wait, what? But of course it was Beast Wars X9 Ravage.
Yeah.
And
was that a weird one for you then? If you obviously
it
not
was
seen
because I
Beast
wasn't
Wars?
aware of the story, and it was like the Ravage cassette was supposed to be jammed into the dashboard of this car, and that was like leading the personality of this being, and it was terrific. What a fantastic backstory for that toy. And that toy came in for some heavy criticism.
I'm sure it did. Do you know, just as a kind of aside, but just because it's occurred to me, and I just want to note this moment down for prosperity at some point, just thinking about Beast Wars. One of my all-time, I think, favourite Transformers moments, like fandom moments, whatever, for me, was doing a watch-through of Beast Wars with you, M.A.S., and we were doing a little chat, weren't we, a few of us, as we were kind of watching Beast Wars, remotely, and you were seeing it for the first time. And I remember we got to episode 3, is it? The Web? And it's the one where Cheetor gets knocked out by tarantulas and has a little dream sequence. And of course that dream has a jet mode Starscream in it for all of 2 seconds or whatever. And I remember you just typing, what the F, do you know what I mean? Like Starscream, and just being like completely sort of blown away by it. And it was just such a joy to kind of see it through fresh eyes, that kind of nod or whatever. I know it's like completely off topic, but just
I love how Beast Wars developed that story. I enjoyed that watch through thoroughly, and I think I would have appreciated that Binaltech reference to Beast Wars Ravage so much more had I seen those episodes. And it's funny because every time I went to a UK show in the 90s and the early 2000s, there was a room which was constantly showing episodes of Beast Wars for people to sit down and watch. Probably the poor folks who had to accompany Transformers collectors to these shows and had nothing to do would just sit there and watch Beast Wars episodes the whole time. Yeah, it would have increased my appreciation for BT Ravage, and I liked BT Ravage.
It still was a weird one. I can see why people were, maybe a little bit put out by it or whatever. It is a weird toy for sure. I mean, like Grimlock as well was one that I know a lot of people, took umbrage with because it wasn't a T-Rex.
And can you imagine, Ravage was the one immediately after Grimlock. It was just like, what is happening right now?
Double whammy of Grimlock and Ravage, just like animal heads
on cars.
Would have been
can you imagine
if
what if BT Grimlock had a dinosaur T-Rex head?
Yeah, right.
That would have been amazing.
Would have been my favourite.
Get Slag in there as well with his little horns and whatever on the next one.
There's bull bars on the front of the car.
Yeah.
Just a question for all our UK listeners, and I'm saying this with full understanding that this may get cut out, but I would like to ask Sixo and Liam, if we'd gotten a Binaltech Slag, what car would it have been?
Oh man,
I know this. It would have been, in Only Fools and Horses, Del Boy's green Capri, the one they call the Pratmobile.
Oh yeah,
the Ford Capri. It says it handles like Maradona. It's got rust all over it. It's bright green. It's got pink like windscreen wipers. It's got the fingers hanging out the back, like the most gaudy 80s looking car ever. I think that
sounds about right.
Transformers 90s style. The Beast Wars are coming up next on Toonami. Open fire!
I remember reading every bio when it came out, when they were translated. Do you remember when that was happening? Like when those booklets would come out, and they had such amazing booklets, didn't they? With those really cool concept drawings in them. What was it called? System configuration or something? There used to be like a really cool drawing. We used to get them for Masterpiece afterwards. I remember the Masterpiece Huffer one was in that same kind of style. And then people would translate the bios, and the bios were always so cool. It just made the toys cooler.
It's because it's set, isn't it, in between season 2 and the movie. It's that little lost year. That's when the fiction is all set.
I wish I could remember it better, honestly. I wish I could remember the intricacies of why each particular character was selected. Because obviously, it'd be very easy from the outside to just look at Ravage and say, oh, okay, Ravage was 1984. Let's put him as a car. But then the backstory was sophisticated.
Do you know why it was in the fiction? Because they found his craft. Some Earth group found his craft, wasn't it?
Archaeological
the tape of his
dig, yeah.
backup memory. And that's what they...
Oh, what, after he's destroyed in Beast Wars?
Yeah. So they find his ship, and he's created a backup of his memory. It's a little cassette tape. That's why.
And they tried to get information about the future, didn't they?
I guess like 4 million years later or whatever, because he would have been killed in the past, and then that makes sense.
And he uses his knowledge of the future to try and change things, doesn't he? And take over. Shenanigans occur, and Prowl becomes Chip Chase. I just had to throw that in there.
Sure.
Do you not remember this?
That's something I'd forgotten. Yeah,
that's the insane world of Prowl's mind disappearing in between dimensions and becoming Chip Chase. It's really bizarre.
Fantastic. No, I mean, Binaltech stories were great. Yeah. I love that Smokescreen got this ability to control tons of clones of himself as Smokescreen GT. I really liked that as well. That was fun addition.
But the reason for it all is cosmic rust. That's why they are changing the bodies in between season 2 and 3, because I suppose timeline wise that would be 2003, wouldn't it? Because the film is 2005.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. I was never really aware of the fiction, to be honest. I never really paid too much attention to it. I remember the bit about Dead End being a stolen Sunstreaker body. That I remember. Various little snippets or whatever. But I think for me, mostly it was just like these toys are cool. That's it.
Didn't the original Marvel storyline have Sunstreaker be one of the only ones that didn't get revived at the start?
Not one of the only ones. There were various characters that didn't get revived or what have you. But yeah, he got a bit of a rough run, certainly.
And then also in Escalation, he was decapitated and turned into a headmaster. And then in Binaltech, he gets his body nicked as well. Just,
That dude has no luck. Vanity doesn't pay.
He's got to be taken down a peg or two, maybe. I don't know.
But the Binaltech fiction is bonkers, and it's so weird. And I think it still carries on in some form, doesn't it? All the sort of Japanese little mini comics all tend to fold into one crazy universe.
They have a way with the Japanese fiction of making it all part of the same universe, even how convoluted it is or whatever, or how crazy and kind of, reality bending it might need to be. They will fold each bit of it in. They've made so many conscious efforts, even in little tie-in comics or whatever, or pamphlets and all of that kind of stuff. They've just they even now are working to kind of bridge the gaps of all of the different Transformers lines. I think it's
even non-Transformers too, right? Yeah. With things like Spin Out and Corden with the Diaclone history.
It's incredible.
It's really trying to fold it all into one.
They do genuinely have an answer for everything, isn't it? It's always why is this one toy this colour? It'll be, we've got a story for it. In Binaltech, when it's Hot Rod rather than Rodimus Prime, even though it's the cartoon continuity, and the reason's actually pretty cool. It's when he hurls Galvatron out of Unicron in the movie, he sort of lands on Earth and destroys Tokyo. And so he's so stricken with grief, he then turns into Hot Rod. And it's just this
I think I remember that.
Bonkers story. But they always got an answer. I love that about sort of Takara and the Transformers. Everything has an explanation.
But just going back to the fiction and what you were saying about differences between Takara and Hasbro. Do you remember the Binaltechs would come with a little display stand in the box? So the car was actually in a plastic clamshell on a display stand. And you could, legitimately display them on those Binaltech inserts. And that was present all the way through pretty much the whole line. But Hasbro didn't have the display stands, they were just sold as toys. You know, they didn't come with this fancy booklet with a system description or the concept drawings. So there were so many distinctions. And if I'm not wrong, that alternators were originally being sold around $19.99. But if you wanted the Binaltech, and I don't think they were too hard to find on import. I think Forbidden Planet had them. I remember buying them from Epic Heroes in London. There was plenty of online sources you could get them from, and they were about 40 quid each. Typically, I remember the Binaltech costing.
They were about twice the price for sure. Yeah,
no question.
But you could really see, it is a toy line where you can really see that difference in mentality, can't you? Because it's at that point that Hasbro still aren't really treating these things as for collectors, are they? They're still toys. So when they bring them over from Japan, they take away all the die-cast and stuff and sell them as toys. And so you get them cheaper, but they're still in that mentality of it being like that, despite how we look at them as being more adult-orientated. Hasbro weren't.
That's right, yeah. That's why Windcharger had his long barrel gun totally nerfed, and it was a scanner instead. It was just this weird box that he was holding, which was, bizarre.
You've got to think about that gun. It's like the third time you've mentioned it.
It was such a big deal. Like people were scrambling to get those Repros to use on their Deceptor charges and their wind charges. And it was such a good toy. It was such a shame to neuter any aspect of it.
Is it as good as the fishing rod / sword Tomfers and the steamer that came with Binaltech Asterix Hot Rod?
It was Kiss Players.
Kiss Players, that's
Players,
the
That was amazing.
Yeah.
I bought 2 Kiss Players Rodimus so I could have that fishing rod as his pipes on both hands. I remember that distinctly.
I love that. I love that toy so much. It's funny. And, I'm kind of glad now that we're talking about Kiss Players that we've moved on from the fiction.
Let's not talk about
that. let's maybe sidestep that. But it is funny because whenever you talk about Kiss Players, of course, that's the first thing people think of is that fiction. Mm-hmm. And, it tends to kind of jam in the memory a little bit, let's say that. But what I will say is that the toys are actually excellent, and I had both the Convoy and the Rodimus, and they were 2 of my favourites without a doubt. And the Rodimus especially, I would say, still stacks up as probably my favourite of all of the kind of Binaltech or
simply glorious
related releases. Just amazing,
really cool. Really stand out.
I only sold those 2 a couple of years ago. And especially both of them, but especially the Rodimus was one that I remember packing it up and thinking, I kind of don't want this to go. Actually, it was one that I was I may still at some point be like, okay, I need to get it again, just because it was just wonderful.
That whole the Kiss Players' way of selling them with the figure started in Asterisk. Do you remember?
It did.
With the Broad Blast and
Sunstreaker, and the Atari. What's he called? Auto Rupa.
Yeah, that was Kiss Players. Yeah, that's right.
It is strange, isn't it? That just talking about Kiss Players and that when you think of say Binaltech, it's not that big a toy line, but it still managed to have 2 different sublines, didn't it?
Yeah, it was distinct. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, Kiss Players isn't even actually a subline of Binaltech. It's just like a completely different thing because, of course, it's got G1 cassettes and a couple of those like little Beast Wars,
the little balls.
Balls. It's got various random things.
The lion and the eagle and
the
robot, which were originally microchange.
Yes, well, I was going to say, which is a real Diaclone nod of itself. So, funnily enough, I do happen to have actually just on the old desk there the little Laserbeak repaint from Kiss Players. There you go. Yeah, no. It's the little G1 Laserbeak mold in orange from that set.
Sundor.
I think that's his name. Could be wrong, so I'd need to look it up.
It's that set where you get Rosanna as well, isn't it?
It is. You do get Rosanna, who is here somewhere as well. There she is.
And was it Glit? Rosanna. Glit was the white Ravage.
Yeah. Yes, I believe so. You've got to make sure you say that correctly.
Yep.
Otherwise, let's not go there. But
back to Kiss Players.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think the Rodimus and the Convoy for me were just 2 spectacular releases. I loved all of it. I did, the little human figurines, slightly strange, but still the whole thing was cool. I even thought the little surfboard that turns into a sword was cool.
That was cool. The figurines, like you mentioned, with Asterisk, I think you had to remove their legs entirely to put the sitting legs on.
You did, yeah.
They were just really weird. I remember being not in the slightest interested in those. It was such a conflicting time for that toy line because Alert, Sunstreaker, and Broad Blast were spectacular looking. And the packaging for them had the amazing artwork on the back. And they were packaged in robot mode now instead of car mode. It was like a reboot. And the problem is like that Alert, the Subaru mold, was really showing signs of degradation by that point. I mean, it would not hold together. Nothing would sit flush. And you said your Sunstreaker was chipped. Mine had this really weird bend in the rear wing. So even then it was starting to show signs of age. And by KISS players, obviously the diecast had gone from Convoy. So the Convoy version that came out in KISS players didn't have diecast, but BT22 Convoy did have diecast. And I never owned that version, but I did own the Wonderfest exclusive Black Convoy.
I knew we were going to get there.
That was the most disappointing thing ever for me in the toy line. And I looked forward to that toy for years.
I've heard it is I've never seen it in hand, but I have heard that it's like quite floppy or whatever.
It's awful. It was so bad. And that was a $1,000 toy at one point, crazily, considering what the line had been like right up until that point, BT16.
It's a real shame because actually the toy itself, the design, I really like. I think it's, I had the KISS players version, and I think it's great, honestly.
It's beautiful. It's really good looking. I think if you had the KISS players, which was plastic, and people who had the Alternators Convoy and the Alternators Nemesis Prime probably actually really liked it. And I remember seeing it in person, the Alternators, and thinking, that's a really nice looking toy. It just made me want the black exclusive version more, but I guess it just didn't suit diecast. It just kept folding over on itself. The weight distribution was way off.
That's really disappointing to hear. Did you ever have what was it? I can't remember which number it was. Was it BT22 Convoy? Which was
never went for it
well?
as a result. No, as a result, I never went for it.
That would be interesting to see if it was the same. I guess I was out by that point. I think with Binaltech in general. So it was after my time. I mean, what was that? 2008 at that point. So I was definitely out.
Probably right. Yeah.
Yeah,
and of course we had BT19 to 21 as well. You remember, like we had Blue Streak and RC and another version of Jazz, Argent Meister in silver, the Mazda Speed version.
Yeah, they had like a little last minute run, didn't they? Because they did. Because what was it? It was asterisks. I can never say it, asterisk in 2005, 2006 KISS players. Then 2007 was just like the exclusives or whatever, and then 2008 suddenly it's like a couple of just going back to the sort of original Binaltech releases with Blue Streak or whatever. So yeah, really strange.
Yeah, with some changes, of course. Like the Blue Streak no longer had the really awesome magnetic axle for steering underneath the hood. It had just like little black pegs that hooked the axle into the wheel mechanism. So they kind of were cost cutting at that point already. Again, obviously the mold degradation was the thing for the Subaru mold at that point.
That's a real shame to hear. I guess they've done the Subaru mold quite a few times over. I mean,
times,
yeah. So it's probably not too surprising. But I didn't get any of those last four. The Argent Meister, RC, none of that. I thought RC looked pretty cool though.
Looked amazing, yeah. Even the Meister looked great.
Yeah, kind of different. But it's a shame they didn't do any new molds. But I guess probably by that point it was all pretty much done and dusted, wasn't it?
Yeah, for Binaltech, it was dying throes, I think, at that point. I mean, the movie had probably signaled the end of the budget for that toy line, I would imagine.
It's so weird to think of those toys, at the end of that line coming out, and the film had just been in, in cinemas or whatever, like a year at that point. It's such a kind of strange timeline to me. And I guess with all of this in context, I know we've already kind of said it, but you have to remember the impact that film had on all of this. It just made such a huge change in direction for a lot of the franchise. So yeah, major.
It changed everything. It really did.
Yeah.
And 2008 would have been the start of animated as well.
That's true.
Beyond anything you've ever seen before. Transformer Classic Pretenders.
Why do you think the Convoy mold isn't one of the most fondly remembered toys? Because Optimus in most lines is generally sort of the tentpole figure, isn't it? It's always there in the first wave. There's usually an Optimus and a Megatron, but here there's no Megatron, Galvatron, or even a Soundwave or anything like that. It is just Optimus, and it's very late.
Well, remember when it launched, it was like the Binaltech smokescreen was shown going into MP1's trailer, wasn't it? Or something like that. There was like MP4 and Binaltech were shown to be like contemporary releases. I wonder if it was like, hey, look, we're doing the odd Masterpiece, and you can put your Binaltechs with Masterpiece, and they're supposed to go together. I don't think Masterpiece Prime was 1/24 scale like the Binaltechs, though. I don't know for sure.
Well, I don't think it didn't have a sort of definitive scale or what have you. I don't think so. But yeah, I mean, they were definitely promoted as being part of this, or sort of at least kind of sister releases, if you like. It was always, I think there was even an interview with one of the designers where they actually said that they designed the MP4 trailer around Binaltech, much in the same way that MP10's trailer was designed to fit with, the Carbots, and that's been a huge feature of that line since MP10. It was definitely designed with that in mind. I think they have actually said that in an interview, as I say, which is, I think, part of the reason they went back to do MP4 with the trailer was that, because they were like, oh, there's an opportunity here to kind of tie them in a bit more. But for me, I never had any desire to see an Alternators or Binaltech Optimus, really, because MP1 fits so well. It always struck me that they were meant to go together.
It's funny because you said in either this episode or a previous one about how every figure is shown shaking MP10 hand. It's also the same with every Autobot car is shown rolling out of MP10's trailer, isn't it? Yeah. Even on the back of their individual boxes.
Got to have those two things. To be a successful masterpiece in this day and age, you've got to have those two things. You've got to shake MP10's hand and you've got to roll out that trailer. Otherwise, what are you doing? Honestly, just...
Scale.
Who are you? Yeah, well, it's a statement of intent as well, isn't it? Because they've, as I think we were saying earlier, with MP10, it was very much about that statement of intent of we're going to do all these cars, we're going to do the lineup, and you never had that with Binaltech in the same way. There was never that promise, even if maybe we as collectors kind of imagined that there was. But certainly, I don't know. For me, it felt like Optimus was done because of MP1. So I guess when I remember seeing. Yeah, I remember seeing the Convoy toy the first time and thinking, that's a weird one. But it's still a nice toy.
I remember at the time with MP1 never feeling like it needed an upgrade. I remember seeing that toy in person for the first time, and the thing that made me buy it were the leg vents. I remember my friend just like stamped it on the table and the leg vents opened. I thought, I need this toy in my life. There's no way I can go a day further without this. And I bought into Masterpiece at that moment. The way it was at the time, like, okay, sure, it was a slightly janky truck mode, but it didn't feel like, oh, I can't wait till they update this. It felt amazing at the time, and like, this is the pinnacle of Transformers toys right now.
That was very much the idea then, wasn't it? Like, people would say this is the perfect Optimus Prime toy until we kind of moved into an era where it just kept getting refined down, didn't it, into something else. But
so you say there wasn't a statement of intent, but showing BT1 with MP1, I mean, like you say, maybe some people did take that as a statement of intent. It's like, that's why they didn't feel the need for another Convoy, because we had this amazing one.
Well, I think that's it. I think that was sort of my point, was that I think we interpreted it as such that, they look at all the potential here for them doing all these characters, but they never sort of explicitly said that's what we're going to do. I guess that was my thing. But yeah, I was the same with MP1. It was the pistons and all of that. I got the Ultra Magnus version as well when that came out, and I remember I was so excited about that. I remember showing it to a friend of mine, and I distinctly remember his reaction as someone that hadn't been into Transformers since he was a kid, and he was just like, "Oh my god!" And I think even he at the time was like, "I may have to get this. It's just so cool." And it was just, I don't know, it just felt like anything. And you say about the truck mode, I was the same as you. I never felt like it was a problem. And it's funny because I saw someone recently actually posting a picture of MP1's truck mode online saying, oh, it looks a bit naff. And I thought, yeah, I can see what you're going for. But at the time, it was wonderful. It was just, maybe it's been surpassed now, but it really felt incredible. And I think actually did fit well with Smokescreen and all of those guys.
And as a testament to those Binaltechs, you don't get people looking back at those car modes now going, wow, that looks out of date.
No, never. How could it? Because it's just it's hard to think how that would be surpassed, really, because the car modes were just, I mean, what else could you do? Maybe with Smokescreen, you could have, I don't know, like the back window or what have you, where the legs fold up. Maybe you could do something extra with that. But realistically, that's about as good as car modes are going to get, isn't it?
Yep.
It is interesting that you pick up on that, because there is something to be said about that time, and those two toys in particular, is that they were really the first real time you started really focusing on engineering, weren't they? Like on what it could evolve to be, because you were still very much in the era of toys, weren't you? They were just, you had mainline retail toys for kids, and this was the first time you really saw engineering starting to really move toward a more complex adult sort of themed toys, didn't you?
Yeah, I guess it makes sense when you think about the timeline of it, because 2003, is perfect time really, because it's sort of almost 18 years, give or take, after the original, start of the franchise. Not exactly, I'm sort of rounding up or whatever, but it makes sense that obviously then you've got people that grew up with it coming into adulthood, and that they're going to be looking for something different. And it's different again now, because now, kids are into Transformers. At the time, the kids were into a different Transformers. It was Unicron Trilogy and all of that. So I don't know. It makes sense to me that they pitched it when they did, and that they thought, yes, let's go after the adult market. And it worked.
Yeah, it was on the back of G1 reissues in Toys R Us as well, and from Takara and from Hasbro. So,
do you think that the reissues maybe led to that? Do you think it was like the sales of the reissues that?
Oh, I don't know. I reckon the lead time for something like MP1 and BT01 was well in advance of being decided by something like that. But I just guess it makes sense that we had these reissues, our childhood toys, but still very much toys in the stores, and then modern Unicorn Trilogy toys, very much toys in the store. So yeah, I agree with both of you that this was like collector focus, engineering focus, and look into the future about, bring the past, marry it to the future. This is what you get.
It's really strange, isn't it? Because you think about Alternators and Binaltech, it doesn't quite get that big rep, and it's not a toy line people refer to very often, but it really just does change the path, doesn't it, from kids' toys? There's like a fork in the road there where things really change, and it sets us on the path where we are now with such a heavy collector focus and stuff like that, and the amount of range we have.
I think it was really, really, I hate to use the word replaced, but it was just supplanted maybe by Masterpiece, because Masterpiece did basically exactly the same thing. Realistic car modes of G1 characters, high engineering, very displayable, adult collectible, but added screen accuracy. So it took the one thing that Binaltech didn't have, and Binaltech wasn't building itself up on these different characters with a very recognizably different fiction and universe that we were seeing on TV or we had a nostalgic link to. It was all nods and winks and acknowledgements. It wasn't direct, straight up, this is the thing you've always wanted. And then obviously Masterpiece cars are going to go with Masterpiece Prime better. So it's like, it's hard to find people who have something that Alternators and Binaltech provides 100% to, unless you're a real strong car enthusiast and you really like the car. Yeah, exactly, which is why it took me so long to get rid of them. And yeah, I look a bit silly now having written articles like why I'll never sell my Binaltech.
Was that an actual? That was an article.
That was an actual article. Followed up a year or two later by "Goodbye Binaltech."
Why I sold my Binaltech.
Is next week's article going to be why I've rebought all my Binaltech?
It's very much like
the only one who knows how to get lots of article material out of one idea.
Oh, here we go.
607 Potter.
I was just going to pick you up and say that it's very much like your "I am not Spock, I am Spock" kind of magnum opus, isn't it?
Right. I'll end up with just Binaltech smokescreen, cabinets full of them. Yeah.
Well, why not? But I think
fictionally accurate.
Yeah, true. I think it's a line now that I could sort of see myself getting back to one day. I don't know. I do really still appreciate it. I had my Binaltech Hound in hand until fairly recently, and every time I looked at it, I just thought, "Wow, this thing's so cool! It's just great." It's one of the better molds, I think, from the series anyway. But I just love that toy. But just so nice to kind of handle and transform, and just think it looks great. And it's one that I would, presumably, I think always display in vehicle mode over robot mode, which is unusual for sure.
Yeah, I think what you'll find with Binaltech is that there's a lot of affection for it. Yeah. Very few people remember it sourly, I think. But even though people have decided that their money would be better spent on Masterpiece, so that active spending goes towards Masterpiece and maybe Vintage and other new toy lines, the affection remains for Binaltech and Alternators. I think we all just had a really great time collecting them at the time.
Yeah. I do see some less positive comments on it, though. Like, you do see people, and again, I don't want to generalize, but it does sometimes seem to be people that maybe haven't held the toys in hand, that they post pictures of stuff and they're like, "Oh, that doesn't, that looks a bit awkward," or, "Why is Shockwave a car?" or, whatever. And I don't know, I guess it's the old classic, isn't it? That it means more to you if you were there at the time than if you're looking back on it retrospectively. So,
if you haven't tried to fold up Binaltech Smokescreen's arms and get those shoulders under that hood and get those magnetic points aligned, you haven't earned your stripes in this hobby, mate. If you haven't tried it and succeeded,
it's a rite of passage.
It is a rite of passage. First came ROD Sideburn, and then it was Smokescreen and his mates. And then Binaltech Grimlock for the unlock achievement reward.
Yeah. It's funny actually talking about Sideburn. I know we talked about him earlier as well, but I actually transformed that toy. I got 4 versions of it, that mold, and I transformed 3 of them earlier today, I think it was. And it's quite easy now. It's funny.
Yeah.
But
and it's really ingenious too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very clever. It's just, do you know what it is with that toy? It's a bit off topic, but it's having it in the right order. So it's like the way that you have to half turn the waist to fold the one arm around and stuff like that. And you've just got to get it in a very specific order of steps. And sometimes it's a half step to facilitate another step, which I think is actually quite clever because it's like a legitimate puzzle as opposed to just, work through these steps, which I really kind of like. But I'm trying to think now, I'd be interested to see now what I made of some Binaltech toys and their kind of complexity, because they never felt, I guess at the time they felt like maybe they were quite complicated, some of them, but now I kind of feel like maybe they wouldn't.
I think they were just different. I mean, I always think of Binaltech Smokescreen's legs and how you have to bend the knees and everything at just the right angle. Yes. And sometimes you haven't bent it quite enough. There's just a little bit more give in the bend, and then the back of the car compacts perfectly and aligns with the front. And that was the first time I'd experienced a transformation like that. And it was almost like the slightly more complicated RID ones would prime you for what was coming. And then Binaltech, of course, primed us for everything that came afterwards with things like Masterpiece Sunstreaker or just those more slightly complicated molds.
Like you're saying about Sideburn, I still have that problem with Prowl today, where it's not a complicated toy, but every time I pick it up, it takes me a few moments to remember how it works. It's because it just feels so different to G1 or any other toy line, the way those toys fold and convert, and you look at it, and it can take you a few minutes to actually work out where the bits are supposed to go and how they fold. And
do you mean RID Prowl or Binaltech Prowl?
RID Prowl. Okay. It's just this, because there's not actually that many steps involved. It's just working out how it folds, and it's so clever with the way it does it. And
it is a good one. Mind you, thinking of old Binaltech Prowl, that's one to be careful with, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. Mirrors off first touch. Yeah.
Exactly. I thought, actually, it was interesting. I think that my copy had a mirror off, and I don't think I'd even necessarily noticed at the time until I read about it online, and then was like, oh no, do you know what I mean? And realised that actually it must have happened at some point.
Bad.
So, yeah.
I thought you were going to say you didn't realise till you took a photo and someone then tweeted you underneath, where's that left wing mirror or something?
Right.
Oh, that was a different time. That was that was when you made your own discoveries, and actually a little flaw in your collection could merrily go unnoticed for years at a time without someone online just, pointing it out on a daily basis. Now I wake up in the morning and I wake up to little messages telling me what I've done wrong the day before. Do you know what I mean? Which is always a great. I'm sort of trying to make a rule to myself to not, read tweets or whatever before coffee, just because it's like too depressing. When you're first thing in the morning and someone's like, "Oh, you forgot to fold this bit down," or whatever, or forgot to do this.
Casting shade on a whole line that you don't collect. Like, how dare you not collect that line?
Why did you not include this toy or whatever? I don't know, all of that stuff. But it's not really a big problem. But it's just first thing in the morning. Sometimes it can be a bit kind of like, cool.
Go well with your Weetabix.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's what was it? What we were saying about cornflakes before, but it's strikes me that back in those days it was a very different thing. You just collected for yourself, didn't you? There was no social media in the same way. Obviously there was the internet and there was online Transformers presence. There were forums, but you didn't post absolutely everything you did on like Twitter, or there was none of that. So
there were very few people who did. Do you remember Remy's World?
I do.
Does anyone remember the photographer Remy? He used to have. It was around about that time when I can't remember what else was in the market, but it was like reissue exclusives. Maybe just the early Binaltech. There were just very few collectors who were sharing really high resolution photographs of toys. It definitely wasn't a prevalent thing at all. I'm pretty sure I wasn't even on like Twitter at that point.
Well, I think it's kind of taken on now a whole new dimension. It probably is interesting and relevant to the discussion in many ways, because it's taken on now a whole new, or brought a whole new aspect to the hobby, and no doubt the way that particularly younger collectors collect. Clearly the internet and social media is going to be such a huge part of that, and actually I think that I've certainly seen it with a number of Masterpiece toys and others where opinions are made up and quickly shared on a particular toy that, is maybe not liked or whatever online. And that kind of becomes like its established reputation, if that sort of makes sense. Was I think actually back then
the narrative is driven by the fans,
Very much so, very much so. And to the point where, we've joked about it in private before, but that I have definitely had more than a few messages from people saying that they don't like a particular toy I've posted a picture of, and then when I'm like, oh, that's a shame, and get into conversation, it turns out that they don't own it, and that's a symptom of the internet. That's people just seeing an opinion online, and it turns out that maybe some YouTuber has said it or whatever, and that they've just kind of taken that, if you like, as the accepted opinion on that toy. And I don't think you got that back then. I think you were more free. Does that make sense?
Well, the narrative back then was driven by places like TFW.
Yeah, but even then, TFW was, I suppose, a lot of dissenting voices, wasn't it? It was lots of people, all with different opinions, as opposed to what you have now, where you get exactly, yeah. But what you have now, of course, is more prominent people. I mean, there were prominent people back then as well, but I don't know, it just feels different somehow. I can't really put my finger on it, but it does feel different to me, certainly.
Yeah, it's not a few people doing what you do now, which is being on a video platform, making reviews of toys that come out early, and then people adopting those feelings, with people with very strong followings. And because you do get that, don't you? You get a lot of people saying, I watch this person's reviews and I watch that person's reviews, and I wouldn't say it's tribal, but it's definitely to the point where people have their preferred content creators, and it's not surprising that if they haven't experienced toys, they will adopt those opinions, and before they've had a chance to experience them themselves.
I think so, and I think maybe it's natural to a certain extent, and it's of course it's going to happen. I guess it's, if anything, now it feels weird to kind of look back to 2005, 2006, and think of a time when that wasn't the case. It's hard to sort of imagine now in a funny way. I'm just thinking of like getting Binaltech Prowl or whatever, and not immediately putting pictures on Twitter and being like, oh, look at this, and 20 people reply going, love it, hate it, whatever. You didn't get any of that. It was just literally you at home. What do I think of this toy?
Actually, you did get that, and I was pretty guilty of it.
Oh yeah, I wasn't my
because of course those test shots, like the test shots that were coming out. If you got one of the test shots, you would share photos and you'd make a whole thread about it, get on the news page, and you'd start getting questions about, well, what's the toy like? How does it transform, and all that stuff. So just to a lesser degree, I think.
Who's more than they pretend to be? Mega Pretender Transformers, Mega Pretenders. Inside one, there's the other. Then they both transform and combine to form another.
Okay, so we've spoken a lot about the car modes. We should probably talk about the robot modes a little bit. What did you guys think of the articulation on alternators and Binaltech? Because for its time, it was still quite novel, wasn't it? I mean, RID and Beast Wars had very good articulation, hadn't they? And so here we're still seeing a lot of engineering mixing, so it's quite new. And they probably don't quite get the rep they deserve for it, but some of it's a little bit wonky, isn't it?
I think it's interesting because I think, as you said, we'd already kind of got used to articulated toys by that point. With Generation 2 was the first to do ball joints. Beast Wars carried that on. Beast Machines, so, and then obviously RID, but so that had become quite firmly established since the 90s, early 90s even. But I think this was something different. I think the articulation, on the whole, was pretty good. It wasn't ball jointed, so it felt different to a lot of the mainline stuff at the time. But I think that they weren't like super posable, and it wasn't up with what you get now or what you maybe think of now with Modern Masterpiece and all of that. But I don't recall ever thinking, wow, I wish these toys were like way more articulated than they are. Smokescreen, all of that, they were fine, I thought, in terms of articulation. Certainly if I thought back to that original one that drew me in, that Swindle, that was great. That was all the articulation I wanted on that toy. I wasn't, now it's like you would see it and think, well, where's the ab crunch? Where's the all of that kind of added articulation that has sort of become normal. Where's the butterfly joints on the shoulders and things like that. But back then, it was great for the day, I think.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say on Smokescreen, it's funny because whenever I pick him up now, I always hate that when other people do it and they go, "Oh, it doesn't have this or doesn't have that." But whenever I pick it up, I'm always really thrown by the lack of like a bicep swivel on his arms, and it feels like such a really weird quibble. But when you move the arms, and I think it's because we do so much photography, I'm so used to picking up a toy and being able to twist the arms and and pose it, and everything you do with that toy just feels so different. And I'm wondering if a lot of the articulation complaints that you do see about them, even from myself, I wonder if it's sort of backdated and it comes from being so used to things being so good now. You sort of look at little things that are missing and they feel bigger than they did at the time, whereas you wouldn't have noticed.
Definitely is a bit of that for sure. I think
there was one example where at the time it was obvious that there was an articulation issue, and that was with the Viper mold, especially Sideswipe. And that was the second one in the entire line.
Yeah, that's true, actually. That's true. The legs were you're right, actually. Not the most really stable tricky one.
Yeah, and it didn't look at all natural when you had busted out a pose. I mean, I was looking at my old photos where I thought I'd posed it really well, and was like, yeah, that looks really painful and awkward for the robot.
Yeah, the only real sort of stance you could do was just like tilting the legs slightly, wasn't it? Just fanning them out so that it kind of had almost like a hands-on hip style pose. That worked pretty well. But yes, you're right. That wasn't the best for it. Actually, now that I'm sort of saying it was all good at the time, but I'm sort of thinking about a few more examples. Like Windcharger actually was a bit awkward. Yeah, Prowl. Yeah. So yeah, maybe it wasn't the
big
best.
Bulky
actually.
Legs.
Yeah. There were definitely
tracks as well was a little tricky.
Well, I was just going to say there was definitely a bit of a few of them kibble kind of impeding the articulation going on, and Tracks was one of that was one for me.
Absolutely right.
Tracks actually was very articulated. It had all the joints I think you could really want, but it just had like the rocket launchers, car bits hanging off here and there. It had the kind of hip skirt thing going on, which looked great. It actually was all quite meaningful. They really kind of made the most of it, but it did impede.
It is a lot of it as well. They do have a lot of the joints, but do you think it's possibly because they are a lot of large car parts, aren't they? Like today, modern Transformers, if they did them now, there'd be like 4,000 different folding panels for the chest alone. Whereas then they're still very much like the RID toys, where there's lots of like the whole front is just one piece, isn't it? And it's a lot like that.
For some of them it was, yeah.
So it kind of takes away a lot of, not so much the articulation, it's dynamism, isn't it? You can't bend, even if they've got those joints, they don't bend in sort of a human kind of way, do they? It's very stiff.
But in a funny way, it kind of made them feel more G1, like classic G1. It kind of felt like, but particularly the metal ones, Binaltech, it kind of felt like I'm thinking of, predominantly the Smokescreen mold or, all the kind of remolds of that. I don't know. It really had that kind of classic G1, but in a modern toy feel to it because of the way that the whole front of the car becomes the chest. There's no fake parts, nothing kind of shrank down.
I'm
sure there was. Okay, here we go.
Straight to Tracks.
Yeah, I was
of course,
waiting for
fake
an
chest.
opportunity.
Fake
But it
chest,
looked
of course.
so
Yeah,
good
but
on him, didn't it?
It did. It
Yeah,
did. I was meaning the smokescreen mold particularly, but but yes, you are right. Trax did have the fake chest, and it worked well. Actually, it worked wonders. I guess that's an interesting one because that was obviously an attempt by them to replicate his original G1 look, whereas they didn't need to do that because other toys weren't going for that. Other toys,
Right.
the heads maybe looked more like the G1 toy, but otherwise they kind of threw out the rule book a little bit. I mean, actually, Dead End or Sunstreaker is kind of a good example of that, where there's not really a lot about that toy other than the head that looks like
Right.
G1 Sunstreaker. So I wonder why they did it with Trax.
Who knows? I mean, there's evidence all throughout the line of them trying different things, isn't there?
It does.
It's like-
It feels so much like a testing ground, doesn't it? Like when you sort of look back on it now, there are so many elements that are picked up in modern toy lines, like the fake chest, which is quite a standard thing now, isn't it? But you see them first appearing here.
Yeah, I was thinking about this whole fake out thing, and the first example I can think of is Power Master Optimus Prime. Was the first one
what, with the
with
windows?
With the
Yeah,
windows,
exactly. So he had the front of the cab, and then when you fold out the arms of the cab, he's got chest windows, which aren't actually windows in any other mode.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think Trax was the first one that did it that blatantly for the purposes of looking accurate to a point in time, to a particular reference item.
Well, what about MP1? MP1's got the old fake grill.
Yes, he does.
Oh yeah.
Very good point.
It's always been there in the Master. It's funny. I saw someone actually commenting on this not so long ago about Masterpiece, saying, "Oh, all these modern masterpieces, all with their fake parts," and it was like, it's been there since the beginning. It's always been a thing. But yeah, no, MP1 had famously the fake grill, and I actually remember seeing the fake grill for the first time, and I distinctly remember thinking, that's genius. That was my immediate reaction to it. Was like, that's so clever in terms of the engineering involved, and just thinking that what a great solution actually to get it to what you want it to look like.
Yeah, and I really don't think it's a problem for us to be talking about MP1 so regularly because it just seems so intertwined with Binaltech.
It's the very same time, isn't it? Was it December 2003, isn't it? I think.
And Binaltech and Alternators is so much about its time. A lot of the people I speak to who speak about it fondly don't just remember the toys fondly. They remember the period of time in collecting fondly and the people that they met. I mean, I've got to mention like Super Quad 7, Alan, who's such a big,
He's a good dude.
Yeah, he's such a proponent of Binaltech and Alternators, was still very much starting chat groups and threads on forums about the subject when Masterpiece was well underway. I remember this very clearly. And he's one of the guys who customized Binaltech and Alternators toys to the point where he could almost have any character at hand, creating new characters. I mean, I don't know how many Subaru molds that boy bought, but it was like loads. So, there was like a massive kicking customization scene as well. So remembering that period of time is almost as important for everyone who's into this toy line as the toys themselves. So I'm really not surprised that MP1 has come up a lot tonight in discussion.
Well, it's funny when you talk about them both like that, because it is like with Binaltech and Alternators, it's like you're both the opposite way around almost. With Masterpiece, it's always looking backwards. Whereas with Binaltech and Alternators, when that came out, everyone was looking forwards at the future. And it's such a different, I don't know, it's weird how they're so similar and one it feels like it's evolved from the other, but they both look at things in the opposite direction almost. Yeah,
I think if you hadn't have had Binaltech, I don't know, would you have had Masterpiece and its kind of new guys, the post MP10 era? Would there have been the appetite, or would Takara Tomy have realized the appetite for all the carbots, all done with realistic licensed alt modes and all of that? I don't know. Maybe they would have done, but it does feel like Binaltech really paved the way for that, certainly.
Right. In many respects, I agree.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think, all right, Binaltech ultimately wasn't, it didn't last all that long. It was only 4 or 5 years, but I think its influence has been quite big, actually, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, as far as collector-focused lines go, not mainline, is Masterpiece the only longer-running collector-focused line? Not that we've had that many in
Well,
Transformers,
Masterpiece.
but...
No, we haven't. The masterpiece is 18 years old now, which is mad, absolutely
Yeah,
insane.
it's crazy.
It's mad.
Yeah, really, really. But can you even really consider masterpiece the same line? I don't know, because it's so different to when it
Yeah,
started.
it's very different. Yeah.
It is mad to
But
think
that's
that
another
MPO1
episode.
MPO1 can vote. That's how
Yeah,
he can buy a pint.
and drink.
It's
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Like, even with the numbering of that toy, it wasn't even MP01, was it? It was just like MP1.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
you might get another one, but it's never going to get to 10.
It's just
Yeah, exactly.
It's weird to keep going back to it, but it is just amazing thinking about that time and how seeing those two toys at the same time and just this whole looking back at it now, how different things are for us, what we see, what we're into, what we collect, how the toys are marketed and pushed. And it's just such a different, that whole thing of seeing G1 again, like new, wasn't it? It was just incredible. Whereas now everything is so G1.
Yeah, I think the thing I often think is that you imagine now if a new line came out, and all right, we're a bit saturated with it all now, but whatever. Imagine a new line came out and it was an Optimus Prime, and it wasn't like a whole wave of toys announced. You know, like, so we've just had the old Hasbro Pulse Fan Fest, and you know, you lose count of the reveals. You know, what else is there? What else is there? Okay, another thing. Here we go. Just back then, one toy is unveiled and released. And then it's actually the better part of another 2 years before the next toy in that line is released. And you've got this other sort of concurrent line that's also pumping out things, but you've got one toy announced in that as well. And then, a second one comes out, what is it, a couple of months, a year later or whatever. But then a lot of it is repaints. How long would that last now? It just wouldn't. I mean, it really took kind of a good long while for things to kind of kick into gear, and I don't know, it never felt like a problem at the time. It was almost like you could be hanging on waiting for the next thing, but the anticipation of it all was just worth it somehow. It just kept you on the hook.
Think about it now, if you weren't into the main line, if you weren't into Unicron Trilogy, and I wasn't, and
I wasn't at the time,
and there were just like a handful of G1 reissues, I remember like a lot of my collecting activity was just looking for vintage stuff. I was still there was a very big aspect of the Transformers community was still vintage collecting and stuff to do with that. And then we had the mainline collectors. So yeah, when something came along that introduced one new thing that we were really into, yeah, they could dine out on that for a fair few number of repaints and months before we started to get a bit annoyed about where it was going. And, the evidence is right in front of us. We all sustained interest in that line for quite a long time.
Well, if you recall those sort of toys, it was like that, wasn't it? If you were sort of like the mainline toys, every time there was one G1 repaint, everyone went mad because it was such a random thing to see, wasn't it? It was just so unusual at the time, and people kind of gravitated toward that. And it's so different now. It's the complete opposite end of the spectrum, isn't it? And it's like Sixo was saying there about how the space between the releases, it's like, if you look at the way everything's done now, it's always in waves, isn't it? You would know what they are for a year in advance, and it would all be massively mapped out by Hasbro and Takara years and years in the future. Whereas this never felt like that, did it? It always felt like something just popped up out of nowhere, and it was this kind of surprise more than anything.
Yeah, the magazine pictures, the grey resin prototype. Trax is the one I really remember as showing up in the magazine scans. I can't remember if it was Hyper Hobby or Dengeki Hobby or one of those. And it was just the grey prototype of Trax, Binaltech. And I was like, yeah, that's how we got to see a new one.
Yeah. And imagine then, like what we get now, imagine back then, if there was like an online event or something like that, and the designers, the actual toy designers, were going to show you on screen, hey, look, here's these new 12 toys that we've designed as part of a trilogy of toys with an accompanying cartoon, and here it all is, all mapped out for you. Pre-orders go up, and you can order this thing online in the next half hour. It just would have been. What would we have done with that at the time? I don't know. Now it's like, I don't know. You see something and you think, where's the pre-order? It's mad.
Yeah. And think about the prices. Like Black Zarek just went up, and the Ark. That's 2 Titan pre-orders within like the space of a couple of days. I think it was something like that. And back then we were even like talking about, I'm not really sure I'm going to buy the repainted version of that Binaltech that's coming out at the same time. So it's a little bit costly. Pay £40 for one and then another one. But now, like you said, an entire wave is advertised, and people will drop the pre-order for the entire wave.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that FanFest event, I think 90% of the pre-orders were live at the end of it, and so you're going to get people merrily dropping, I mean, hundreds of pounds or dollars or whatever straight away on that, and it's I don't know, maybe it's normal to some people now.
Sign of the times.
Yeah, it's a sign of the times. There's still a part of me, the 2003 to 5 part of me, that's like, wow, that is insane, and it's only kind of when you step back and
this
look
is after
at
a planet has landed on their doorstep.
Well, that's it. Yeah. We've just had Unicron. Let's not forget. It's and they also unveiled that £700 Optimus as well. So it's
right. I wonder if that's the equivalent of MP1 back in 2003. Like, and also here's this really special, completely separate. So are we going to be sitting here in about 18 years' time talking about how there's an entire line of G1 accurate RoboSen self-transforming toys now?
They'll be self-podcasting toys. It won't be us. It'll be them.
They'll just be buying themselves, I think, at that point. They'll just show up.
Just turning up at your doorstep on their own, yeah.
It'll be the Amazon drone that comes up to your house and turns into a robot, and that's your toy.
Yeah, the drone. We've billed you, by the way. Don't worry. Like you're all set. How about I make your dinner now? It's just going to be. Where does it end?
And he will have his Optimus Prime butler finally.
Yeah.
Living the dream. That's all I can say.
Got a little tiny tray, with a little Amazon package on it.
My little G1 Optimus with his white fists can retire at that point.
Right.
I don't know. It's all getting a bit Terminator: Rise of the Machines, isn't it? Except it's going to be our toy collection rising up against us at this point.
You're completely screwed, mate. Looking behind you,
the entirety of Cybertron behind you.
Definitely outnumbered. Yeah, but it's just, I don't know. It is funny to think back at the difference, and I know we keep saying it, and I know we're all like, part of me is slightly worried that people listening to this that weren't around at the time might be like, oh my God, these 3 old boys, talking about the old days or whatever. But I think it is interesting. It's probably like a whole episode in itself to just look at how the scene has changed that much, and what it's the internet, what the internet's done to a lot of it, and it's good. It's good stuff. It's made the hobby way more accessible for a lot of people, and it's cleared up so many mysteries, and it's created community and all of that. But it's brought a lot of weird stuff as well. I don't know. It's just interesting.
Now the Decepticons have monster pretenders with rubbery skin.
Beyond anything you've ever seen before. Transformer monster pretenders.
You mentioned community. I feel like that period of time really cemented a lot of community ties between people and people in lots of different countries as well. I remember I bought some of my Binaltechs off a Japanese dealer on eBay, 0F. And he, that was like the place to go to for me on eBay. Like, new Binaltech, I'll buy through him. And it got to the point where, it was back when you could actually have a conversation with people on eBay when you bought from them. It wasn't just this whole cold add to cart, pay, the feedback, distinct process. It was a communication. It got to the point where that dude actually agreed. He bought tickets to a concert for me in Japan because I was supposed to travel to Japan at the time, and he was like, "Yeah, man, don't worry, I'll get those tickets for you when they come out." And it was, and we would write to each other and just like check up on each other and stuff like that. When there was when there was the massive earthquakes and the tsunami in Japan, I was talking to him, making sure him and his family were okay. And like, that was a bond that was formed at that time. And a lot of people I still talk to today, I met through Binaltech and Alternators.
Man,
so
I'm just happy if I can get more than 4 words out of some people on eBay, asking a question or whatever, But it definitely was a different time.
It is quite incredible, and I think it touches back on something you were saying earlier about how different it all is with social media and stuff, and how you interact. And I think a lot of it is like you're saying about the pre-orders. You get swept up, don't you? Because there's such a community thing now. You get swept up in the excitement because everybody's doing it. It's all happening in real time. Whereas before, at this time, you'd sort of see this for the first time on the internet, maybe a picture, and then the next time you'd see it would be in a shop. Possibly, you'd be like, "Wow, there it is." Whereas there, you see everybody at the same time is so excited, and you join in, and then you're like, you can't wait to pre-order it, and so you get in really fast, and there's
FOMO.
this whole and even though it's not going to sell out, everybody rushes and they're like, oh my god, the pre-orders are going to be gone, and this like rarely ever happens.
I don't remember any Binaltech selling out. I don't remember there being one that I couldn't get even when it was at its height of hype, like when BT Tracks was coming out and we just had Hound and Dead End. I felt like that was the height of the hype. I was just dipping in at that point. I was like, yeah, well, let me just go back and pick up BT01 then, because I've got the alternator. Let me go and get Smokescreen. And at the first release, and it was still widely available online. I don't remember at any point being like, I can't find this toy at any stage during Binaltech. Alternators, though. Alternators a whole different story.
What, difficult to get?
Yeah, there were some alternators that, I wanted to buy them at retail and it just wasn't. Do you guys not remember how hard it was to get an alternator Swerve, the red repaint of Tracks?
I never got one. Never tried.
That was a really tough toy to find. It was going for quite a lot on the secondhand market because it was really difficult to get them. In the end, I think a friend of mine picked it up at retail in Denmark and sent it to me.
Do you know, I think I just completely missed Swerve as a thing. I think it was actually only recently, or maybe it was the other day. I can't even remember when I was doing the notes for this. But, I looked it up and was like, oh, it's a shame that they never did like a Road Rage repaint of Tracks. And then kind of looked it up and was like, oh, they did, but it was some other dude, It's like, I don't know, just one of those weird kind of memory lapses or whatever that they actually did that, I guess.
See, my buying habits at this time were so different to that. I wasn't even aware of complete inlines or I didn't even realize Swerve existed for years. For me, it was I'd pick up the odd one when I saw it in a shop. There wasn't no sort of chase to complete them or anything like that, or sort of really following the line beyond what I saw on the internet and what I then purchased in the shops. It was only very much like the odd one here and there.
Well, you know how it is. Every line has its nerds.
Yeah.
And people, I've realised I'm painting a target on my own back here, but I remember when
podcasting about transforming robots.
Yeah.
Are we the jocks? Is that what you're trying to say? We're the jocks, man.
Yeah. You and me, Liam, we're the jocks. That's right. Yeah. Maz is the nerd.
Is this a bad time to continue this line of thought then, or I'm going to talk about how Alternator Streak had a left-hand and a right-hand drive version? Should I just stop right there then?
No, we're going to have to find these nerds. Then I know about that.
Yeah, no nerds here. That's for certain. So you're going to talk about variants now, aren't you? I knew.
No. It's just like alternators was a different story to Binaltech. I think because we weren't getting them on import. It was like, where do you find them? Who's got access to them? Can I get one? Like there was a lot of stuff I never saw at retail for alternators. I was really lucky to find the Ravage, and the one that came after, when alternators were still carrying on. But I never got the Rumble. Like I never even saw Rumble. I still to this day have not seen alternators Rumble. I never got a roll bar.
Never had one in hand. I'm always curious about that Rumble. It always looked a bit awkward to me. I don't know, but would love to see it.
Really cool car mode.
Yeah, very cool car mode. Bit different. But how was the Ravage? Because that always intrigued me.
That was such a clever little thing, wasn't it? It was a Jaguar, which is what Ravage used to be, and also a Jaguar, an XK8. And I think it was really well thought of. I never opened mine. I was just felt like I was saving it for this moment to open it, but then I just sold all the alternators and that went with it. So I never really got to experience it properly, but it's a very well thought of toy in that line. But at that point, it was like that and Rumble, and it was it for alternators at that point.
It was the missiles for me. It was the first time I was moving the legs and the missiles came out, and it was just such a crazy sort of concept. Because there are two different Ravages, aren't there?
Yeah, there's Battle Ravage, which was the black Tracks that we spoke about earlier with the cat head, and then this the one, like a proper Ravage,
the non-Beast Wars one.
Right, I guess so. Yeah, I guess that would have exactly been like G1 Ravage.
Beast Wars is G1, guys.
Spoilers.
People know. People have seen Beast Wars in the last 30 years or whatever it's been, honestly. People are aware of Beast Wars. But yeah, spoilers.
Don't forget, I brought Beast Wars up this episode. It was me.
Yeah, I know. I'm just conscious that
I set off the panpipes.
I was going to say, you bought your own panpipes especially for me.
Going to get you some panpipes for your birthday, honestly.
So why do you think they did two of Ravage? Of all characters, why do you think there's two of Ravage?
I wonder if it was just car licensing thing, because obviously they got the license for Jaguar, and like it just was such a good fit, wasn't it? The Jaguar that turns into a Jaguar. Perfect. I mean, how could you miss that opportunity? You couldn't.
So do you think there was was there a big gap between them then? Because I can't remember how the timeline worked. I just assumed they would have been in development in a similar time.
Don't know. Like Battle Ravage was probably 2004. It was BT 11. So yeah, maybe late 2004, very very early 2005, and Jaguar would have been post movie. Like 2008,
it was
2008 maybe.
It was the real tail end. It was after. I'm just trying to think. It was after Rodimus and whatever, wasn't it? So
yeah, that was an SDCC exclusive, wasn't it? The Rodimus.
Yeah,
and the Nemesis Prime as well was kind of that sort of thing.
And that was like
kind of period.
That was about 2007, I think. And so I think it was after that, and they did Rumble and Ravage. But I was always intrigued by the Ravage. I guess that's why I was asking about it. It's still one that today, whenever I see a picture of it, it's just, I don't know. It's a toy that I often kind of think of randomly and just go, wow, I'd love to check that out someday, you know?
I think the line's full of toys like that, don't you? Like it's, and for people who aren't even really alternators collectors, there's going to be figures in this entire line that they'll look at and go, well, I'd love to have a go with that because it looks great. And I bet it's fun, you know, just to investigate.
I think so. I see a lot of people talk about skids as, you know, now that skids is kind of on the rise a little bit, you know, with obviously the Masterpiece and, you know, obviously it was Thew that got that toy made when he did a video about it, so I'm told. I'm joking. I have seen people wonder that if it was Thew's video that got it made. I don't think it was. Maybe it was, but who can
I think
say?
Masterpiece has a slightly longer lead time than.
I suspect that may be the case. Not to disillusion anybody, but who knows? We can say it was Thew. But I think a lot of people, you know, with skids kind of coming back into prominence. I've seen a couple of comments about the Alternator toy and people thinking that it looks good.
It's great.
It is.
If you're listening to this and you're curious, go and get it. It's so lovely. I had the Scion version first. I had the test shot first, and it was really, really good. Even with the flames.
Story.
Yeah. It was such a nice, great head sculpt, man. Really nice.
Yeah, really nice. Yeah.
The smallest weapon in the history of Transformers, but really good toy.
And of course, he has the flames, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's got the flames because the American one was the Scion. It was just like that car with the flames was a very pimp my ride kind of flavor, and that's what that car is associated with. Whereas the Toyota BB in Japan, which is the Binaltech, I think is a slightly different sort of vibe to it, and that had stick-on flames, obviously.
Yeah, the Hasbro one's got that very that early 2000s new metal vibe to it, doesn't it? It's got that sort of the Offspring. There's the flame tattoo. There's just you can imagine surfboards on the roof of it. It's that kind of
blaring out "Good Charlotte" from the windows.
Were there any toys that you didn't have at the time but would love to maybe still get? I know we've kind of talked about Rumble and those guys, but were there any that kind of really passed you by that you thought, oof, that's a shame?
RC and Argent Meister, I would really love to have, and the Auto Looper from Kiss Players. Those were the three I still would have made the effort to try and get, but I had pretty much everything else. Do you remember Ricochet, the stepper in the Alternators line?
Yeah, that was another one that I was aware of, but I think I'd completely forgotten about. And again, you know, just doing a couple of notes for this recording, was shocked actually that they'd done a Ricochet, you know, a stepper repaint. I was like, wow, okay, yeah, that did happen. It's mad actually when you think about that. That shows a lot of love for the franchise that they did.
Alternators was really kicking them. I think the most underrated alternator was Camshaft. You know, the grey version of Prowl. That was such a lovely looking toy and a great mold.
Yeah, and another nice nod.
Yeah, a rare throwback to Omnibots, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I think there were a couple definitely that at the time that I would have loved to have taken a crack at. I don't know. I guess I mention it because in many ways it's kind of it feels like the line that I sort of have to stop myself thinking, "Ooh, I'll just get a couple of those," because I know what would happen. Do you know what I mean? I know that it would lead to worse things. Let's say I often kind of flirt with the idea of getting a BT smokescreen because I had an alternator back in the day and would have loved the metal version. I think that
I still have one. I think this is the line where
Me
you
too.
can actually have one.
He's
Because
the only one I still have as well.
those car modes are so beautiful that you can just have. And I know in your case, Sixo, you were talking about Kiss Players Rodimus. I may have come across one on eBay last night that was a very reasonable price that I might link you to later
here
today.
we go.
But I still have a Binaltech Smokescreen GT version. The one that came with one launcher and missile, and you had to get the other release to get a second launcher and missile. Cheeky buggers. And I bought the two, because you do. And everything got sold off, but I kept Smokescreen with the two launchers, and I still have that on display at my work desk in my office. And I think it's really possible to have just one. If there's one that you love above all the others, that you revere the way I revere that Smokescreen, it's possible to just have one and not have this desire to get loads of them. Because when it comes to this line, you probably don't need all of them. It's space, it's expense. Actually, probably not that much expense these days. But you're not going to get on with all of them. And none of us really got on with all of them, all the alternators, all the Binaltechs. I reckon you can just pick one and have that be like a special tribute.
Well, they're sizable things, aren't they, as well? It's fair to say they do take up a lot of space. I mean, they make for an incredible display on a shelf, but it's real space eaters.
We now return to the Transformers.
So as we're talking about the exclusives, is this a good point to drop in the one? What I can't remember what it's called. You talked about it before.
What the Meister, the one and only.
It's pink, isn't it?
Mayuko Iwasa edition. Yes, the Japanese model and actor. Sorry, she designed the color scheme for that Binaltech BT8 one-off. It was to raise money for orphans who, their families had been victims of road accidents, I believe. And that was a one-off item auctioned back in what must have been 2004, something like that. And it's a one-off, incredible-looking item. I think we mentioned it in episode 2.
Yeah, that's what led me to think of it.
I mean, I know there are lucky draw collectors who still look for it to this day, and maybe they know who bought it. Maybe they're waiting for the moment that comes up for sale again. But it's very likely that a fan of the person who designed the toy is, a fan of Mayuko Iwasa, actually owns it. Maybe not even a toy collector.
They might not even know what it is. It's just in a box in storage.
Yeah, it'll be in its glass case. Yeah, it's not necessarily in the hands of a toy collector. So that's an incredible piece. And then, of course, there's the Wonderfest exclusive BT-17 Black Convoy that we talked about.
The Clear Mirage.
It's time to talk about Mirage, isn't it?
Yeah, this is.
Oh man, that Clear Mirage. Do you know what? Actually, as well as Rodimus, if there was one I was going to go back and get, it would be that Clear Mirage.
It'd be the right one to do as well. I hope there's still many of them out there that haven't yellowed inside the package, but that is a wonderful, wonderful toy. It was Binaltech, and it was under the Binaltech banner. It wasn't die-cast, but when you saw it, you could just forgive it because it was absolutely gorgeous. The most gorgeous of them all.
It's the only all-plastic one, isn't it, in Binaltech? Is that right? Because, it's all clear plastic, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. I think BT-19 to BT-22 were die-cast, yeah. I think it is the only all-plastic Binaltech, yeah. Because obviously we had Kiss Players afterwards that were also plastic.
Plastic.
But yeah, under Binaltech, that was it. BT-18, eHobby exclusive. Just fantastic. I can't say enough good things about it. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Can you imagine if some of them have yellowed? What they're sort of like the.
They have. I've seen them. Yeah.
Are they like the little shining Magnus? Then is that tributes to Pierce Magnus?
It's like those clear car brothers that you get from Car Robots. You know how some of them have discolored and they don't look properly clear anymore. It's that sort of thing that you get with it. I'm so glad we're on to Mirage now. I wanted to tell you this story about how I didn't break it. It was
allegedly.
Yeah. It was 2005 because they revealed Alternators Mirage at it was either BotCon or OTFCC. I can't remember what it was in 2005. And I got a phone call from Paul Hitchens, who was at the show, and he, obviously he knew I was really into alternators. He was even able to buy some artwork from the artists of Alternators box art at that show. So he calls me and says they've just revealed Alternators Mirage, and obviously I've got a bit of a thing for Mirage, and he said, it's amazing. You know, the wheels are on the front of the legs. And keep in mind, that was the first alternator that pulled that off. And it's a Ford GT. And I was like, for anyone who knows the Ford GT, you just knew that was going to be the highlight of the line. And it turns out they had this resin prototype at the show, and then one of the Hasbro representatives broke it at the show.
No.
And obviously they had to put it back into a box and send it back to Takara, broken. I think it was at the waist as well, which would have made it G1 accurate. But I really hope that's true, but I don't know if it
the
is.
Ultimate throwback.
Yeah, but that was, I think you even mentioned it earlier in the show, but it was an absolute line highlight. Mirage was just like top tier alternators, top tier.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful toy. I've always thought that the Ford GT was a beautiful looking car anyway, just so unique, so individual, and married really perfectly to that character. You know, not a kind of a good one, because not a traditional take, obviously, but still works exceptionally well.
Yeah.
I think it's a good example of how they kind of mixed it up a bit, but in a really like the best way. And the robot mode is just brilliant.
Yeah, it really is.
Excellent.
What a head sculpt. Not classic Mirage, but still very Mirage. And that's an incredibly good skill to be able to pull off as a designer, to completely change the head sculpt shape, but still retain the character of the person it's homaging. That's an incredible toy.
It's true, actually. Yeah, you're right, because it is a very different take. It's a very modern take and looks entirely different when you think about it. But still, you look at that toy and you think Mirage. It's interesting.
Even the transformation on that toy is fantastic as well, isn't it? Like, I know a lot of them get sort of a bad reputation for being overly complex or whatever, but that one, it's the way it unfolds and the way you clip the steering in with the wheels and stuff for the little sliding bar. It's just so. I remember the first time I transformed it, and I didn't realize that was there until I noticed the pieces weren't attached, and then clipped them together, and I was like, oh my god, this is just amazing. And it's a very special toy, that one.
Really lovely opening doors as well, and exactly the style of the Ford GT.
Yeah, it feels like pretty much like the pinnacle of that whole line, doesn't it? It's like the one that probably feels like the best example of the toy line of everything coming together.
Yeah, and it's nice that it was so far into the toy line as well. It's almost like, because we've talked a little bit about how maybe the promise was not fulfilled, but if you had said to anyone back in 2003 that you're going to get a Mirage in this line, Mirage has got to be treated right. I don't think he's been treated well in recent lines, but Alternators and Binaltech treated him absolutely perfectly, and we got the most spectacular looking car. And let's not forget the original cartoon pilot. Who was the hero? Who saved the day at the end? It was Mirage.
It was. I think like that toy. Thinking back, like I think the only gripe I ever had with it was the chest doesn't clip in, does it? It just kind of
that's right. It just hangs.
It just hangs. Yeah.
And then masterstroke of repainting it into Rodimus for KISS players.
That Rodimus, man.
Yeah,
love it.
Premium feel.
They are the same mold, but they feel so different with the colours, and it's a beautiful, beautiful toys.
Was that the first ever Rodimus toy to have the visor in robot mode?
Oh, I think it must have been at that point. Because Classics Hot Rod's 2006, isn't he?
Correct.
Yeah. So we're in that time, aren't we? But that must be the first example of it.
And the first one that came with a fishing rod.
Yeah, it was.
What a toy, honestly.
It was all getting a bit masterpiecey actually at that point, wasn't it? Like modern masterpiecey. The fishing rod, it had a little human character, it had kind of different accessories that all kind of clipped together, and it was a really interesting release. But I do think that and the KISS Players Convoy, I think they're it's an exceptional pair of toys. I think they go together really nicely. And again, I know I said it earlier, but it's funny when people talk about KISS Players that they kind of have a very definite view on it, but actually the toys are phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, it may have felt like these toy lines fizzled out and were just replaced. And I think it's unfair to not see them as going out with a bang, because I think the last toys in all of the associated toy lines were great at the end. We had Jaguar and Alternators. We had Mirage as Binaltech, and we had Rodimus as KISS players, and even had Broad Blast as Asterisk. All of these end of line toys were spectacular. And I wonder how things would have turned out differently maybe if we had them earlier.
Destroyers from deep space.
I just wanted to also spend a tiny amount of time talking about the artwork for alternators and Binaltech, because maybe it's my lack of knowledge of the lines that just went previously, like Unicron Trilogy and Car Robots and Robots in Disguise, but I felt like the artists that started working on the boxes and the packaging for alternators, they've remained like really big names in Transformers. You know, they've been comic artists that are really widely celebrated. People like Marcelo Materi, Alex Milne as well. You know, these are people who worked on Guido Guidi as well. And I was really fortunate to meet all these guys at various Transformers toy shows, Auto Assembly, BotCon, and buy alternators artwork from them. And it's incredible how beautiful this artwork is. And I sold a lot of it over time, but I have kept a few pieces. And one of them is Guido Guidi's Prowl, because he actually had a shaded version of that Prowl artwork for alternators. And it was interesting because a lot of them had to redo the artwork when they were released from the big boxes to the bubble boxes. And by looking through some of the artwork that these guys brought to shows, for example, I think it was Grimlock. Marcelo had done the Grimlock artwork for the big box, and then he also had artwork for a bubble box version of Grimlock that actually never got released. Then there never was a bubble box version of the Grimlock alternator, the Mustang. And I think Marcelo maybe didn't know that it hadn't come out, because I missed the chance to buy it when I first saw it. And then every time I asked him about it subsequently, he was like, no, I think I'm going to hold on to that one. I'm not going to sell that one. So it was a really special piece of artwork. And seeing the different styles of all the people who worked on alternators artwork and owning it for as long as I did was one of the biggest pleasures of being involved in this toy line for me. And I still have some really treasured pieces, including Mirage. I still have the artwork, the original artwork for alternators Mirage in my collection.
Do you know, it's funny actually, I'd not even clocked that the artwork on the bubble boxes was so different, but it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Completely redone.
Because it's not full
really
body either. It's just basically from about the thighs upwards.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really good artwork, actually. And it is...
It's beautiful.
I think it's fair to say it was kind of leagues ahead of what happened at the time. I mean, obviously, it wasn't kind of that far, coming on the back of stuff like even Beast Machines, which was all just kind of the one same picture of Cheetor. And that was kind of the real low, actually, at that point. And there was actually some really nice artwork for some of the... I think, particularly some of the Japanese releases in the Unicron trilogy, that actually did have some nice stuff. Like Micron Legend art was pretty good. But for sure, the alternators artwork was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
How do you keep that artwork, Maz? Do you store it, or do you have it on display? Or
I had all of my alternators artwork on display for many years while I was still living at home. And they were all I'm going to trigger somebody by saying this. They were in frames that I'd bought at Wilkinson's, so basically it was just like a white back, put the artwork in, glass top, and clip it together. But these days it's in an art folio, like a proper art portfolio binder, not binder, sorry, just a big folder. And I think the bits I still have are Mirage and Prowl. I had to keep the Prowl by Guido. It was insanely nice. And Marcelo's Mirage are the ones that I've kept. And, I'd love to display them. Like I was saying on episode 4, one day I envisage having my Transformers artwork on the wall, because, artwork and Transformers just go hand in hand. It's a massive part of most people's love of these lines.
it is from box art to comics and everything, isn't it? It's so intertwined with those toys, and like the ideal of what those toys could do, even if that's not what the actual toys did themselves. It's kind of it's so much, isn't it? With the rise of Masterpiece and the 07 movie, sort of Binaltech kind of was covered then, wasn't it, by other toy lines, basically. There wasn't really that much need for it. But it did sort of carry on spiritually, didn't it, with Alternity and what was the other one? Oh, GTR.
Yeah, Transformers GT.
But we'll save that for another podcast.
They deserve a good segment.
They do. There's a lot to talk about there, aren't there?
Oh, I could do an episode on those GT toys alone. They're just beautiful. But yeah, definitely one for another day.
Okay, so before we wrap up, guys, we've got a quick few questions. But so, what's your personal favourite of Binaltech or Alternators, Sixo?
At the risk of saying it again, I think it would probably be the Mirage mold, and no doubt that Hot Rodimus version, I think, was just so beautiful. I do remember getting it. But there are tons that I loved at the time, tons of them that I think, when I put them in my brain, I'm like, oh, I love that one. I loved Hound. So that was a real favourite of mine. Just something about it. Loved the suspension, the kind of little springy suspension that it had. That was really, really special. I think that was one that I first got as a Binaltech as well, because I already had the alternator swindle. So that was like really magical, definitely. Absolutely love that one. Really love the Jazz as well, Meister. That was cool. But yeah, probably the GT mold for me, definitely.
It's a fantastic choice. Maz, how about yourself?
I think I'm going to go with the original Binaltech smokescreen, especially the 2004 Binaltech smokescreen GT with the launcher and the updated Subaru Impreza World Rally car mold. That was, and still is, just the most spectacular thing for Transformers to have done, to marry those two universes together and to take a punt in this direction and do it such justice to the point where it could still own a display today. And there's not a single person I've ever shown that toy to who hasn't been impressed by it in some way or form. And for alternators, it's Alternators Mirage, because wow. Just wow.
With Smokescreen, he's definitely the most iconic toy from this toy line, isn't he? And I don't know if you recall, do you remember the sort of small titanium toys they did? The really little ones where they did a Smokescreen as the Impreza again there, didn't they?
Yep. Non-transforming little figurine, right?
Yeah. Is that the only other piece of sort of merchandise or toy from those that sort of carried on? Does that make sense? Am I getting that? Where's that right there? Do you know what I mean?
I think so. I mean, off the top of my head. And I do have that little thing, actually. That little titanium smokescreen thing, yeah.
Cool. Okay, so following on from that, if someone...
Well, what about you?
Oh, my favourite.
Yeah.
See, well, I was going to say Mirage, but then I keep forgetting that I've got one other alternator, and it's the Hound, which is an excellent one, but it's painted as the Jurassic Park Jeep.
Of course it is.
Of course, yes.
Of course it is.
That's a fantastic gift from my friend Nathan, and it's just this amazing looking Jeep. But I've never transformed it because I'm so scared that paint might come off or something, and it's such a beautiful deco. But I know that it transforms.
I'm so glad that exists, and it's you who owns it.
I was thinking about it when you were talking about that, the one-off, and I was like, it popped back into my head. I was like, oh my god, yeah, of course.
Perfect.
So I'll show you that in a bit. But yeah, so that is probably my favourite for personal reasons. But yeah, if somebody else was thinking of getting into alternators and Binaltech, is there a particular toy either of you would recommend as the gateway drug, so to speak?
I think that's a tough one. I guess, Swindle or Hound, again, is a good one to kind of get started with, just because the benefits of the car mode are so obvious. And it's not one that is immediately identifiable as a robot. There's not really much kibble to it or any of that. Transformation's simple. Robot mode's really good. That could be a good entry one, I think.
I'd say Windcharger / Overdrive or Jazz would be great too. The Mazda RX-8 Jazz is just gorgeous. Smokescreen also, if you like that sort of thing, if it's someone who's got a slightly car-based passion for these toys, and also Mirage. I mean, who's not going to love that Mirage?
Yeah. And I hope it's quite clear from this how much we are emphasizing that so much of the magic of these toys comes from actually holding them, doesn't it? They're not, they look beautiful on the screen, but particularly with Binaltech and alternators, there's something very special about having them in your actual hands, isn't there?
Yeah, and they still have features that have not been bettered by latter toy lines. You cannot look at Masterpiece cars and say they are better car modes than... It still has its thing. It still very much has its winning formula that still stands up today.
It's quite incredible when you look at sort of the Masterpiece Hound and then you take the Alternators Binaltech Jeep, and it's like they both do incredible, accurate vehicle modes, but completely differently from the way they transform, like how complex Hound is versus the Alternators one, which is also complex, but it's just so different, and it's just an incredible experience, isn't it?
Yeah, the Binaltech toys, the designs, they weren't... they don't have that need to kind of contort in the same way to get to a specific predetermined configuration. They don't need to look like the cartoon in robot mode, so they don't kind of need to be as convoluted as maybe it needs to be. So, like with Masterpiece Hound is a good example, because that transformation is one that until you do it, there's absolutely no way that you could work that out in your brain. I don't think. Well, maybe some people could. I'm sure. Someone like Liam Pope from TFW, I'm sure could, but not many people would be able to. And but then, as you said, Binaltech Hound, relatively straightforward, does what it says on the tin, but is really enjoyable for it. And it's almost like, again, it was just a different era, wasn't it? It didn't need to look like the cartoon. It just needs to be a loose, rough homage, and in some ways felt a bit freer for it, I suppose.
Okay, so last question. So we're all in the bar at TFN. We're having a few drinks. Someone from Takara comes up to you, because they're there for some reason, and they say, lads, we're going to make any character you want, and you can have any car license. Which one do you pick, Sixo?
It's a really good question. I don't know about the car. I think character-wise, I'd go a bit off-piste. I'd go a bit, not necessarily classic, ultra-popular G1, not like one of your big names. Because actually, a lot of those have been done. If I'm just kind of looking at the old shelf now, the 1984-85
That's
shelf.
exactly what I was just doing and thinking as well. I was like, wait, who didn't they do?
Well, this is it. A lot of the names that they haven't done are like Hoist and Grapple and stuff like that, which, aren't typically sports cars.
Ironhide.
But, yeah. So I'm going to go to a completely different area of G1, lots kind of latter day G1. Another set of cars. I'm going to say Boss. Turbo Master Boss.
Very nice.
I think that would be. I don't know what alt mode it would be. Realistic car.
I knew you would have a fantastic answer for this.
But I think something like that. Set of Turbo Masters, particularly Boss, in Binaltech alternator form. I think that would be incredible.
Could you imagine if they could find a way to make the Turbo Master missiles from like just some random car parts?
Yeah, that'd be cool. As long as they didn't take your eye out in the process, then maybe they should do if they want to be authentic to the official, Turbo Master experience. Yeah, exactly. You got to at least lose an eye. That's
it's part of the experience.
Go on, Maz, you thinking?
Yeah, we're all waiting for this.
I know there's a lot of cars in G1, but this is a really tough question.
They got through so many, didn't they? It's astonishing when you actually start going through it.
I mean, they did roll bar.
I know.
They did throttle bars. I'm sitting there.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be a car, though. Doesn't have to be a car.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, shall I pick a Dinobot?
What about Chase?
Over on mine.
Yeah, Chase is a good one, or Freeway. Those are really cool.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it'd have to be like a contemporary car as well. Maybe not something from the early 2000s, but and they never did like hypercars or supercars. I think the Ford GT was the closest they came. These were mostly just like sports cars, Honda S2000, Subaru Impreza. Very like, I think I'd really love for them to have done a Honda NSX. Whoever it is, I would love it to be a Honda NSX. I think that's a gorgeous car. Right of the same kind of era of the Subaru Imprezas. Maybe even a Mitsubishi Evo would have been really cool to see, to go along with the Impreza. Like a Mitsubishi Evo would have been amazing to go along with the Impreza. But let's go with Honda NSX. As for who, give me a minute.
I'm amazed he's not said it yet. We're all waiting for you to say one name, and I feel like you haven't said it. And
Give Sunstreaker another go.
I was thinking of a certain mascot, a certain podcast mascot.
We're all thinking
an orange NSXR that turns into bisque, and it would be so Binaltech to have it have a lobster head as well, wouldn't it?
It really would. Be in good theme with Battle Ravage and all of that.
Right, exactly. Good company. That's right. And of course, Binaltech had an amazing way of working in every different fiction into the story somehow. So
already, whatever year that was, G1 now.
Right.
So my choice is actually inspired by something one of you said earlier, and that would be Dinobot Slag.
Ooh, nice.
As a Dodge Charger. Little bull bars on the front.
Beautiful.
That's
Great
cool.
choice. Great choice.
That's very cool.
So it was something. I think it was what you said earlier, Sixo. That's where it came from.
I like that idea a lot. It would have been fun, actually, if they'd have done all 5 of the Dinobots in car form. That would have been quite something to see. I think, I know people found that Grimlock as a car a bit weird, but just imagine all 5 of them, all grey, but like with the little red accents and things like that. That would have been a lot of fun.
Just make Sludge like just a truck of some description.
Yeah, a bus. I don't know.
We don't get enough transforming buses. We really don't.
I know, we really don't. We really don't. There are certain alt modes. We're going to end up doing a list of boats again, aren't we, in a minute?
Yeah.
Well, we've got them down now, haven't we? We've done enough episodes. We can list them all.
We said broadside.
Yeah.
We said broadside, before anyone quibbles. But yeah, there's definitely some alt modes that are just a bit underdone. Definitely a bus former would be fun to see.
That would be amazing as not even like an old-fashioned London bus, like just a contemporary bus.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
5 Dinobots, Sludge as a bus.
Just thinking about the characters they did, and I was just looking at the car shelf, thinking that's pretty much everybody who was a car. They did Hot Rod, Rodimus, and they did RC. So I guess if it's going to be a wedge-shaped car, and it's going to be the Honda NSX, it's going to have to be Blur, right?
Well, that's going to do it for episode 6 of the Triple Takeover podcast. We hope you enjoyed it as much as all 3 of us did. If there's anything that you think we've missed, then please do get in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, and whatever else we're on at @triple_takeover. Maz, where can people find you?
I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at TFsquareone, one word.
How about you, Sixo?
I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, some others, I don't know, at Sixo TF.
And I can be found at Toybox Soapbox on all forms of social media. Tune in 2 weeks' time. Same bat time, same bat channel.